Elara lived in a world where the presence of ancient gods had become merely a faint echo, a nearly forgotten whisper that only she seemed fully attuned to, a unique, isolating awareness that settled within her chest as a quiet, persistent ache. The world around her continued its slow, indifferent spin, yet for Elara, the air itself felt thinner, the light less vibrant, as if a vast, unseen tapestry of divine energy had been carefully, painstakingly, unraveled thread by invisible thread over countless centuries, leaving behind it quiet, pervasive melancholy. This subtle, profound transformation was not marked by cataclysmic events or dramatic pronouncements, but manifested instead in the way the sunlight fell diffidently upon familiar stones, the profound silence in places that were once resonant with the low hum of divine power, and a gentle sorrow that permeated Elara's everyday perceptions, a constant, quiet reminder of the immense, invisible departure that had occurred all around her. Her home, a simple dwelling nestled on the quiet edge of a town, stood as a poignant symbol of her peculiar existence. For the town bustled with the ordinary, pressing concerns of human life. Trade in the market square, the mending of roofs against the coming rain, the quiet anxieties of daily bread, concerns utterly disconnected from the cosmic fading Elara felt so keenly. Living there, amidst the comfortable, oblivious rhythm of human routine, Elara felt simultaneously present in the physical world and profoundly apart from its inhabitants, burdened by a knowledge that others either lacked entirely or had long ago dismissed as charming but irrelevant folklore, a quiet weight pressing down on her solitary soul. She carried this unique, unshareable reality within her, a secret understanding of the world's altered state that set her adrift in a sea of cheerful ignorance, deepening the quiet weight of her burden and solidifying her solitary role as the last human witness to a grand, silent withdrawal that most of humanity had simply ceased to notice. In her initial, hesitant attempts to articulate the subtle shifts she perceived, the growing quietness in the world, the feeling of a vast, unseen departure, Elara was met not with disbelief or argument, but with polite dismissal, gentle nods of feigned understanding, or blank, uncomprehending stares that spoke volumes of her isolation. These interactions, or lack thereof, solidified her understanding that her awareness was a solitary burden, a unique attunement to a cosmic change that others could not, or would not, perceive, leaving her alone with the quiet weight of a reality she could not share, a profound internal solitude. She learned to hold the knowledge within, the quiet ache in her chest serving as a constant physical manifestation of her unique burden, a silent testament to the vast, invisible departure that had reshaped the very fabric of existence in ways the bustling town and its inhabitants seemed entirely unaware of, or perhaps simply chose to ignore. This fading of the gods was not a violent end, not a dramatic clash of titans or a sudden, explosive departure, but rather a slow, almost imperceptible withdrawal, like the gradual exhalation of breath from a body over centuries, a quiet receding that left no scars or craters, only an increasing gentle emptiness in the world. Elara felt this absence, not as a lack of overt power or divine intervention in human affairs, for such overtness had waned long before her time, but as a growing void in the very fabric of existence itself, a quiet thinning of the veil between worlds that left the human realm feeling strangely hollowed out, less vibrant, less imbued with mystery. This cosmic emptiness she perceived in the world around her mirrored an emptiness she sensed growing within her own soul, a quiet void where the connection to the divine, however faint, had once resided, leaving her with a quiet sorrow for a world that was slowly, silently forgetting its own sacred past, a past she alone seemed destined to remember. Her awareness was a quiet sorrow, an understanding that the gods were not dead, perhaps, but simply gone, faded back into whatever cosmic ether they had emerged from, leaving humanity to navigate a world that felt increasingly mundane, stripped of its former layers of wonder and terror, a quiet, disorienting change. The ache in her chest was a physical echo of this spiritual void, a constant low-level reminder of the vast, invisible departure, a burden that settled deep within her, not as a sharp pain, but as a dull, pervasive thrum, a quiet melancholy that accompanied her every breath in this world that had moved on without its deities. She would sometimes sit by her window, watching the townsfolk go about their lives, buying bread, mending shoes, laughing with neighbors, and feel a profound, quiet disconnect, understanding that their world, while physically the same as hers, lacked the dimension she perceived, the subtle, sorrowful awareness of the gods' gentle, unmourned departure. This isolating knowledge was not a source of pride or a feeling of superiority, but a quiet weight, a burden she would gladly shed if she could, to simply live in the comfortable, oblivious reality of the town. But the awareness was too deeply ingrained, too much a part of who she had become. The way the shadows lengthened in the afternoon, the particular quality of silence that fell over the fields at dusk, the subtle shifts in the wind's song, these were not just natural phenomena to Elara, but quiet signs, gentle confirmations of the ongoing cosmic change. A language of absence that only she seemed able to read. Everywhere she looked, if she looked with the eyes of her burden, she could see the quiet traces of the fading, the spaces where divine energy had once resonated now simply empty, filled only with the mundane sounds of human life or the indifferent whispers of nature. A constant, gentle reminder of what had been lost. The quiet ache in her chest intensified in these moments of profound awareness, a physical manifestation of her soul's sorrow for the vanished, a silent lament for a world that had grown quieter, less magical, less connected to the vast, unseen forces that had once shaped its destiny. She was the last human witness, a solitary figure holding the memory of a world that was slowly, inexorably slipping away, a burden that was not traumatic or heroic, but quiet, pervasive, and deeply, profoundly lonely, a gentle sorrow woven into the fabric of her being. This unique, isolating awareness meant that even moments of simple beauty in the natural world were tinged with melancholy, the vibrant colors of a sunset, the quiet majesty of the stars, for she saw them through the lens of absence, remembering the layer of divine presence that had once imbued them with an even deeper, more resonant significance. Her reality was subtly different from everyone else's, a quiet, internal world where the echoes of ancient power still lingered, faint but persistent, a constant counterpoint to the cheerful, godless hum of the human world around her, creating a sense of being perpetually out of step, gently adrift. She often wondered if this sensitivity was a gift or a curse, this ability to perceive the world's quiet transformation, concluding that it was likely both, a unique connection to a vanishing truth that brought with it an immense, unshareable sorrow, a gentle burden she was destined to carry alone. The townspeople, in their comfortable ignorance, spoke of the gods only in stories as characters in myths, figures of folklore from a distant, almost unimaginable past, never sensing the living, breathing absence that Elara felt in the air, the quiet void that had opened in the heart of the world. Their dismissal of the divine as mere legend deepened Elara's isolation, solidifying her role as the solitary keeper of a fading truth, a quiet burden that set her apart from the easy rhythm of their lives, leaving her to navigate the quiet landscape of absence alone, with only the ache in her chest for company. She understood that the god's departure was likely not a judgment or an abandonment, but simply a natural process, a cosmic exhalation, a quiet return to source. Yet this understanding did little to alleviate the gentle sorrow that settled within her soul, the quiet pain of witnessing such a grand, silent loss. The void in existence felt not like a lack of power, but a lack of meaning, a sense that the scaffolding that had once supported the world's narrative had been quietly dismantled, leaving humanity to build its own stories on the bare earth, a task that felt both necessary and profoundly, gently sad. Elara sensed that this growing emptiness within her, the mirroring void of the world, was not a personal failing, but a natural consequence of her unique awareness. The quiet cost of being the last human heart to remember what the rest of humanity had so gently, so completely forgotten. A quiet burden she accepted with a sigh. She was a custodian of absence, a witness to the quiet retreat of the sacred, living a life that outwardly appeared ordinary, but was inwardly shaped by the weight of cosmic memory. A gentle melancholy that defined her days and nights in this world that had quietly, profoundly changed. Elara found her days marked by the simple, unchanging rhythms of human life. Drawing cool water from the communal well, where the stone lip was worn smooth by generations of hands. A task repeated countless times, yet now tinged with the quiet knowledge that the ancient spring beneath might once have been blessed by a deity whose essence was now thinner than morning mist. She would spend hours tending her small patch of earth, coaxing stubborn herbs and modest vegetables from the soil, her fingers deep in the familiar dirt, while her mind drifted to the vast, silent cosmos where beings of immense power were slowly, imperceptibly dissolving, creating a profound, unsettling contrast between the smallness of her physical world and the immensity of the cosmic drama she alone perceived. Interactions with her neighbors revolved around trivial concerns: the price of grain at the market, the unpredictable weather patterns, the minor squabbles of village life, conversations that felt strangely distant to Elara, their anxieties and joys, like faint echoes from a world she inhabited physically, but was increasingly detached from emotionally. Her unique burden creating an invisible barrier between her and the comfortable normalcy of others. Living in a world where the extraordinary was not violently vanquished, but merely vanishing, like colors fading from an ancient tapestry, presented a constant, quiet paradox, the relentless normalcy of everyday existence continuing unbroken, even as the very fabric of reality seemed to thin, leaving Elara feeling a strange, almost disorienting detachment from the concerns of those around her. Their worries about mundane matters seemed insignificant, their small triumphs fleeting, compared to the silent, grand departure she observed. A cosmic shift so profound it rendered the everyday struggles of humanity almost ethereal, distant echoes compared to the quiet, immense sorrow she felt witnessing the slow retreat of the divine. Elara often took quiet walks through the familiar landscapes surrounding her town, passing through the bustling market square where laughter and commerce drowned out the subtle silence she heard, following the winding path to the river whose banks once held whispers of water spirits, and venturing to the edge of the whispering woods, places once imbued with divine tales, now seeming merely themselves, stripped of their mythical resonance. These places, once alive with the potential for unseen presence, now felt merely like earth, stone, and water, beautiful in their own right, but possessing a quiet, disorienting emptiness, a sense of something vast and vital having been carefully, completely lifted away, leaving behind only the mundane reality of their physical forms, a silence that spoke volumes to Elara's burdened soul. She would listen as people spoke of the past, recounting old stories or traditions with a tone of fond nostalgia for folklore, their voices warm with memory, but devoid of the reverence that comes from acknowledging present power, treating the myths as quaint tales from a bygone era, rather than accounts of beings whose slow departure was still reshaping the world in ways they could not perceive. Elara would listen patiently, a silent observer holding the knowledge of the true, ongoing loss, the weight of their comfortable ignorance settling upon her like a fine, invisible dust. A gentle, pervasive sorrow for the beautiful, terrible reality she carried within her while others remained blissfully unaware, anchored firmly in their ordinary, godless world, focusing on a specific mundane task, like mending a torn garment with slow, deliberate stitches or preparing a simple meal of bread and cheese. Elara would interweave her thoughts about the fading gods with the physical actions, the quiet sorrow of cosmic loss, a constant, low-level hum beneath the surface of her ordinary existence, a gentle, pervasive sorrow that never demanded attention, but was always, always present. Each stitch in the fabric, each slice of the knife, was accompanied by the silent awareness of the vast emptiness growing in the universe, illustrating how the burden was not a dramatic event, a sudden crisis demanding action, but a quiet, persistent state of being, a gentle melancholy woven into the very fabric of her daily life, defining her days and nights in this world that had quietly, profoundly changed. She was a custodian of absence, a witness to the quiet retreat of the sacred, living a life that outwardly appeared ordinary, but was inwardly shaped by the weight of cosmic memory, a gentle melancholy that defined her days and nights in this world that had quietly, profoundly changed. She would often pause while drawing water from the well, feeling the cool rope slick in her hands, and a quiet thought would surface, wondering if the water table felt different now, less vibrant, less alive, compared to the tailies of its once sacred nature, a subtle shift only she might notice in the world's slow transformation. Her small garden, a source of quiet satisfaction, also served as a canvas for her burden as she weeded among the growing plants. She would contemplate the difference between the visible cycles of nature, the predictable turning of seasons and growth, and the invisible, unpredictable, and deeply unsettling fading of the divine, a cosmic autumn she alone seemed to witness. When neighbors stopped to chat, exchanging pleasantries about the weather or the harvest, Elara would offer polite smiles and brief responses, her gaze sometimes lingering on their faces, a quiet sadness blooming in her chest as she considered the vastness of her knowledge compared to their grounded, immediate concerns, feeling the distance between their realities as a palpable, heavy air. The simple act of walking through the market square, the scent of baked bread and fresh produce filling the air, the cheerful din of voices creating a vibrant tapestry of human life, felt almost surreal to Elara. The stark contrast between this lively, ordinary scene and the silent, grand departure she carried within her mind, highlighting the profound isolation of her unique perspective. She would walk along the river path, watching the water flow downstream, carrying leaves and small debris, a natural, constant movement, and she would remember stories of river spirits, of blessings and warnings, and the absence of that potential presence now felt like a quiet void, the river merely water, beautiful, but stripped of its mythical soul. The edge of the whispering woods, where the trees grew tall and dense, had once been a place of reverence, filled with tales of dryads and forest guardians, and as Elara walked its quiet boundary now, the rustling leaves seemed only the wind, the silence deeper than it should be, leaving behind a quiet, disorienting emptiness that echoed the void within her soul. Listening to elders speak of the old days, their voices filled with affection for the legends passed down through generations, Elara heard the stories of gods and heroes treated less like sacred history and more like cherished folklore, entertaining tales for children or nostalgic memories for adults, a comfortable ignorance that shielded them from the truth of the ongoing loss she perceived. She felt no judgment towards them, only a quiet sorrow for their inability to perceive the subtle, profound change, understanding that their comfortable ignorance was perhaps a mercy, a shield against a burden too heavy for most human hearts to bear, leaving Elara as the solitary, silent observer of a world subtly, irrevocably altered. In the quiet task of mending a torn seam on her cloak, her needle moving in and out of the rough fabric, Elara's thoughts would drift to the threads of existence itself, wondering if they felt weaker now, less vibrant, less connected, without the divine hands that once wove them, the physical act mirroring the internal quiet sorrow she carried. Preparing a simple meal, the warmth of the fire on her face, the smell of herbs mingling with the scent of cooking bread, Elara would find her mind contemplating the nourishment the gods once provided, not just physical sustenance, but spiritual anchor. And the lack of that anchor now felt like a subtle hunger, a quiet emptiness that no amount of food could fill, a gentle, pervasive sorrow beneath the surface of her ordinary existence. This constant interweaving of the mundane and the cosmic, the small tasks of daily life serving as quiet reminders of the vast, invisible changes, illustrated how Elara's burden was not a dramatic event, a sudden crisis, but a quiet, persistent state of being, a gentle, pervasive sorrow that defined her life as the last human witness to fading ancient gods. Her existence was a quiet testament to a world in transition, a world where the extraordinary was becoming merely a memory, and the everyday continued with relentless, poignant normalcy, leaving Elara to navigate the space between, burdened by knowledge, yet grounded by the simple, unchanging rhythms of human life around her. A quiet soul in a world that had quietly, profoundly changed. Neri was becoming merely a memory, and the everyday continued with relentless, poignant normalcy, leaving Elara to navigate the space between, burdened by knowledge, yet grounded by the simple, unchanging rhythms of human life around her. A quiet soul in a world that had quietly, profoundly changed. Elara spent a considerable amount of time allowing her mind to wander back through the hazy corridors of fragmented memories, recalling faint echoes of a distant era when the presence of the ancient gods felt undeniably more palpable. A time perhaps inherited through ancestral stories, passed down like whispered secrets, or maybe filtered through the soft, indistinct impressions from her own tender youth, focusing gently on the subtle sensory details of a world that seemed to vibrate with a different kind of energy, one that felt intrinsically more alive, permeated by the unseen forces that shaped existence in ways now forgotten. She remembered the way the air used to feel charged before a storm that the sky god was said to be brewing, the specific scent of ozone mixed with anticipation, or the way the moonlight seemed to gather and pool in certain sacred groves under the moon goddess's watchful gaze, a luminescence that felt heavier, more deliberate than simple reflected light, and the soft, almost imperceptible hum that sometimes resonated through the earth, a frequency attributed to the slumbering Earth Mother. Sensations that were not merely physical, but imbued with a spiritual weight, a constant reminder of the divine proximity that permeated every corner of the world. There were also the sounds she recalled, or perhaps the echoes of sounds, like the low murmur of prayers offered not in rote tradition, but with genuine, fearful reverence, the distant clang of hammers shaping metal blessed by the forge god, or the rustling of leaves in an ancient forest that seemed to whisper secrets only the wood sprites could truly understand. Auditory impressions that spoke of a world where the veil between the human and the divine was thinner, more permeable. A time when the silence of the present would have been an unimaginable, terrifying void, utterly alien to the vibrant, often boisterous, presence of the gods. She held on to the visual fragments as well, the way the sun's first rays might catch a mountaintop just so, hinting at the sun titan's fiery descent, the fleeting glimpse of a shadow that seemed too large, too swift to be mere bird or cloud, attributed to the swift hunter god or the strange, beautiful patterns left in frost on a window pane that were said to be the delicate artistry of the winter spirit. Fleeting images that painted a picture of a reality where the divine was not abstract or distant, but woven into the very texture of the landscape, visible to those who knew how and where to look. A world alive with subtle, powerful signs. The memories encompassed the taste of water from a spring blessed by the river deity, a taste that was said to quench not just thirst, but a deeper spiritual need, or the feel of earth beneath her bare feet in a field dedicated to the harvest mother, a connection that felt not just to the soil, but to the nurturing power that resided within it, tactile and gustatory sensations that anchored the divine presence in the physical world, making the gods not just figures of myth, but tangible influences on daily life, enriching the simple acts of living with layers of sacred meaning. These fragmented recollections painted a picture of a vibrant, though sometimes fearful, world where the presence of the gods, while perhaps demanding and unpredictable, lent a profound sense of significance to human existence, a reality where every sunrise, every rainfall, every harvest felt like a direct interaction with powerful, unseen forces. A time when humanity was not adrift, but anchored within a larger cosmic order, bound by rituals, appeasements, and a constant, humbling awareness of powers far greater than themselves. a world that pulsated with a life that the present now utterly lacked. She couldn't help but contrast the vibrant, sometimes terrifying, world captured within those fragile memories with the quiet, muted reality that now surrounded her every day. A present where the sun rose and set with indifferent predictability, where rain fell without seeming favor or displeasure, and where the earth yielded its bounty through human effort alone. A stark, almost desolate difference that struck her with a quiet, persistent pang of longing for a time that felt undeniably more connected, more significant, even if that connection often came with its own heavy burdens, its own fearful demands, and unpredictable dangers. A time when existence felt less like a solitary journey and more like a shared dance with the cosmos. This longing was not for the fear or the demands, but for the sense of belonging, the feeling of being a small but integral part of a grand, unfolding drama, a feeling that the quiet indifference of the present had systematically stripped away, leaving behind a reality that felt smaller, flatter, less resonant, like a once vibrant painting whose colors had faded to a dull, uniform gray, and the ache in her chest was the silent lament for that lost vibrancy. A mourning for a world that had quietly, almost imperceptibly, emptied itself of its transcendent inhabitants, leaving humanity alone on a stage where the main actors had departed. Driven by this quiet ache and a need to feel some tangible connection to the world of her memories, she sometimes found herself visiting an ancient, neglected shrine tucked away on the outskirts of town, a place where an old ritual dedicated to a now forgotten deity was once performed with solemn reverence. Noticing the thick layer of dust that coated the weathered stone altar, the undeniable signs of decay in the crumbling walls, and the quiet indifference of nature reclaiming the space with persistent vines and stubborn weeds. Observing how these physical signs of abandonment mirrored the vast spiritual void Elara perceived, stirring a deep, quiet sadness within her soul. She ran her fingers over the faded carvings on a stone pillar, once vibrant depictions of divine acts or sacred symbols, now worn smooth by countless seasons of rain and wind, feeling the erosion not just of the stone, but of the memory and meaning they once held. A tangible representation of the slow, relentless process of forgetting that seemed to have overtaken the world, and the silence of the place, once filled with prayers and offerings, now felt heavy, oppressive, amplifying the sense of absence, the quiet confirmation that the power and presence that once resided here had indeed departed, leaving only empty space and crumbling stone. The air in the shrine felt still, stagnant, devoid of the charged energy she imagined it once held, a palpable emptiness that contrasted sharply with the vibrant life of the encroaching wilderness around it, highlighting the difference between the enduring power of nature and the transient, fading power of the divine as humanity perceived it, and the quiet rustling of leaves in the nearby trees seemed to mock the silence of the shrine. A reminder that while some forms of life persisted and thrived, the life that once animated this sacred space had simply, quietly ceased to be, leaving a hollow echo in the heart of the world. Exploring the shrine further, she found remnants of discarded offerings, a crumbling pottery shard, a piece of faded cloth, a smooth stone placed with intent long ago, now just forgotten objects blending back into the earth, tangible links to a time of belief and connection that had lost their power, their significance, like dried flowers pressed between the pages of a book, preserving a form but losing the vibrancy and life they once possessed. And the indifference with which nature treated these objects, covering them with moss and dust, felt like a quiet judgment on the transient nature of even divine influence in the face of geological time and biological persistence. Standing in the heart of the neglected shrine, the bittersweet feeling of remembering the power and presence of the gods washed over her, a complex mixture of awe for the magnitude they once held, a lingering echo of the fear they could inspire, and a profound sense of belonging to a larger cosmic order that their existence had provided. Recognizing how this powerful memory now served only to highlight the immense extent of the loss, leaving a hollow, aching space within her where that connection used to reside, a void that no amount of human endeavor or earthly concern seemed capable of filling. A quiet emptiness that resonated deep within her soul. She recalled the stories of divine interventions, the tales of gods walking among mortals, influencing destinies, shaping landscapes, and the sheer scale of that power. That presence now felt like something from a completely different reality. A grand, epic narrative that had simply ceased to be written, leaving the current human story feeling small, mundane, and strangely directionless by comparison. The memory of the mountain now serving only to emphasize the flatness of the plain. A quiet sorrow for a world that had once contained such towering figures, such immense, palpable forces, and now contained only their fading echoes. Remembering the fear that the gods could inspire, the capricious nature of their favor or wrath, she acknowledged that their presence was not always benevolent or comfortable, yet even that fear felt preferable to the current quiet indifference of the universe. A fear that at least implied a connection, a recognition of humanity's place within a divine hierarchy, whereas the present felt like a state of being utterly overlooked, insignificant in a cosmos that no longer seemed to care. A quiet, isolating freedom that felt more like abandonment than liberation. A melancholy understanding that even the burdens of the past contained a form of connection now lost. The sense of belonging that the gods had fostered, the feeling of being part of a great cosmic family, or players in a divine drama, was perhaps the most keenly missed aspect of their presence. A feeling that transcended the individual human life and connected it to something vast, ancient, and eternal, providing a framework for understanding the world and one's place within it. And the memory of that belonging now served as a constant, gentle reminder of the isolation of the present, the quiet loneliness of navigating a world where the sacred had withdrawn, leaving humanity to forge its own path without celestial guidance or divine companionship. A quiet sorrow for a lost sense of cosmic kinship. She focused her thoughts on a specific forgotten ritual Elara remembered, perhaps a complex series of gestures, offerings, and incantations meant to ensure a bountiful harvest or protect the community from unseen dangers, detailing its precise meaning in the vibrant context of the past, understanding how each step, each word, was imbued with power and significance, a direct communication with the forces believed to govern the world, a vital part of the human contract with the divine, a ritual that anchored human life within the cosmic order and provided a sense of agency and security in a world of unpredictable forces, a beautiful, functional piece of the old reality. She then contemplated its utter lack of relevance or power in the present day, imagining performing the ritual now in the dust-filled shrine, knowing the words would fall flat, the gestures would be empty, the offerings would simply decay, illustrating how the loss of the gods is not merely the absence of powerful beings, but the erosion of the very structure and meaning they provided to the human world, the dismantling of the cosmic framework that gave human actions consequence beyond the immediate and the mundane, leaving humanity adrift in a quiet, directionless sea, navigating existence without the old celestial landmarks or the comforting, albeit sometimes fearful, presence of divine currents to guide their way. The forgotten ritual, once a bridge between worlds, now felt like a broken ladder leading nowhere, a testament to a connection that had dissolved, leaving humanity stranded on the shore of a reality stripped of its sacred depths. And the quiet sorrow she felt was not just for the lost ritual itself, but for the loss of the understanding, the worldview, the very way of being that the ritual represented, a profound, quiet emptiness where a vibrant, meaningful interaction with the cosmos once existed, leaving human life feeling strangely untethered, disconnected from the vastness that surrounded it, a gentle melancholy for a world whose soul had quietly departed. Elara decided to undertake a slow, aimless journey across the familiar, quiet land, not towards a specific goal or revelation that might alleviate her singular burden, but a quiet wandering through the gentle hills and ancient forests, motivated by an unarticulated need to witness the fading on a larger, more expansive scale, to feel the very texture of the world's quiet transformation settling around her like a fine, pervasive dust, extending the sense of loss she felt from the ritual grounds into the broader landscape. She passed through rolling hills that seemed to sigh with the wind, quiet forests where the rustle of leaves felt merely like the movement of air through wood, and meandering rivers that flowed with a simple, liquid grace, focusing on how these places, once potentially resonant with divine stories or presences that shaped their very essence, now felt simply like earth, water, and trees, beautiful in their own right, possessing their own quiet dignity, but stripped of a palpable layer of transcendent meaning that had once hummed beneath their surface. She detailed the physical experience of the journey with a quiet awareness, the feel of the cool, damp ground beneath her worn boots, the subtle changes in the air as she moved from open plains to sheltered valleys, the simple sounds of mundane nature, like the chirping of unseen insects or the distant call of a bird, constantly contrasting the profound simplicity of the physical act of walking with the complex, melancholic thoughts swirling within her mind, the pervasive, constant awareness of the invisible fading that accompanied her like a silent shadow. Within the quiet solitude of her wandering, Elara explored her internal struggle to find some semblance of meaning in this seemingly aimless movement, questioning whether she was truly seeking a sign, a confirmation of the irreversible departure, or simply a way to occupy her time and quiet the insistent hum of her unique burden, allowing the journey itself to become a quiet, walking metaphor for her deeper search for purpose in a world where the old, vibrant sources of meaning and connection had quietly, irrevocably gone, leaving behind a hollow space where divine presence once resided. During her journey, she focused on a specific moment of quiet observation, perhaps watching a sunset paint the sky over empty plains, stretching to the horizon or the first stars, emerge in a sky that felt impossibly vast and strangely indifferent to the human drama below, and described how the quiet, profound beauty of the natural world was now undeniably tinged with a deep sorrow for the lost layer of divine presence, a beauty that felt both immense and somehow strangely diminished by the absence, a silent testament to the quiet departure that only she seemed to fully perceive. She continued her path through landscapes that held echoes of forgotten power, noticing how the light, once described in myths as catching the glint of divine eyes or the shimmer of celestial garments, now simply illuminated the world with an ordinary, earthly glow, a gentle, constant reminder of the subtle but profound changes that had reshaped reality, making the extraordinary recede into the realm of memory and quiet melancholy. Each step she took felt both heavy with the weight of her knowledge and strangely lightened by the simple rhythm of movement, a paradox that mirrored her internal state, where the grand, cosmic loss coexisted with the mundane reality of blisters on her feet and the need to find shelter for the night, binding the vastness of the fading to the small, immediate concerns of human life. She observed how the rivers she crossed flowed with a quiet determination, their waters reflecting only the sky and the trees on their banks, no longer rumored to carry the blessings or the tears of river gods. Their simple, natural beauty, now defined solely by their physical form and function, a quiet testament to a world returning to itself, shedding the layers of divine narrative that once adorned it like sacred jewels. The forests, dense and ancient, whispered secrets on the wind, but they were the secrets of rustling leaves and creaking branches, of hidden creatures and damp earth, not the hushed tones of dryads or the distant echoes of divine hunts, their quietude now born of natural processes, rather than the respectful silence of a world aware of unseen, powerful inhabitants, a quiet, pervasive shift that Elara felt deep within her bones. The plains she traversed stretched out endlessly under the vast sky, their emptiness no longer feeling like a space waiting to be filled by divine manifestation or celestial battles, but simply land meeting air, a quiet, expansive stage where only human concerns now played out, a landscape that felt both liberating in its simplicity and heartbreaking in its quiet, profound vacancy. She noticed how the quality of silence had changed, becoming less the expected hush before a divine pronouncement, and more the simple absence of noise, a natural quietude that lacked the tension or the potentiality of the past, a silence that spoke not of reverence, but of emptiness, a quiet void where once there was a vibrant, if unseen, presence, a change that resonated deeply with the growing stillness within her own soul. Her thoughts often drifted to the stories she had heard as a child, tales of gods walking among mortals, of their laughter echoing in the valleys and their anger shaking the mountains, and the contrast between those vibrant, dynamic images and the quiet, understated reality of the present moment filled her with a gentle, pervasive sadness, a longing for a world that felt more alive, more connected to something vast and powerful. The simple act of building a small fire at night, watching the flames dance against the encroaching darkness, became a quiet ritual of its own, a grounding experience that momentarily quieted the noise of her burden, allowing her to focus on the immediate warmth and light, a small, tangible comfort in a world that felt increasingly abstract and empty of the old, certain angers. She sometimes paused by ancient, weathered stones, places that folklore whispered were touched by the gods, and placed her hand against their cool, rough surface, feeling only the slow work of time and weather. No lingering warmth, no faint vibration of divine power, just the quiet, indifferent presence of rock, a physical manifestation of the spiritual void she carried within her, a gentle confirmation of the finality of the departure. The scent of rain on dry earth, the feel of wind whipping across her face, the distant sound of thunder rolling over the hills. These sensory details, once potentially interpreted as signs or moods of the gods, now felt simply like the expressions of the natural world itself, beautiful and powerful in their own right, but devoid of that extra layer of meaning that had once made the world feel like a living, breathing tapestry, woven with divine threads. Her quiet journey was not marked by grand events or dramatic encounters, but by the accumulation of small, subtle observations, each one a quiet confirmation of the pervasive fading, each step a gentle movement through a world that was slowly, silently, becoming merely itself, shedding the skin of divinity it had worn for millennia, leaving behind a landscape that was beautiful, but felt strangely diminished, like a beloved song played without its harmony. She found herself drawn to places of transition, the edges of forests, the banks of rivers, the line where plains met the foothills, as if hoping these thresholds might still hold a faint echo of the time when worlds intersected, but found only the quiet meeting of different forms of natural beauty. A gentle reminder that the great crossing, the departure of the divine, had already occurred, leaving no visible trace of these mundane boundaries. The weight of her burden did not manifest as a crushing pressure, but as a constant, low-level ache, a quiet hum beneath the surface of her consciousness, like a stone carried in her pocket, always present, a gentle reminder of the knowledge she held and the world she perceived, a world that was slowly, quietly, forgetting its own sacred history, leaving her alone with the memory of its vibrant past. She observed the slow, patient work of nature, reclaiming places once dedicated to divine worship, moss creeping over fallen stones, vines embracing broken columns, trees growing through the foundations of forgotten altars, seeing in this quiet persistence of the natural world, reflection of the world's indifference to the loss of its gods, a gentle, inexorable return to a state that required no celestial presence, a quiet, profound shift in the cosmic order that unfolded without ceremony or lament. Her internal struggle was not a loud battle, but a quiet, persistent negotiation between the part of her that yearned for the simplicity of ignorance and the part that felt an inexplicable, gentle pull towards remembering, towards witnessing, towards carrying the quiet weight of the fading, a silent debate that played out in the quiet spaces of her mind as she walked through the world. She sometimes stopped to simply listen to the silence, trying to discern any faint echo of the divine whispers that were said to have once filled the air, but found only the natural sounds of the wind, the water, the earth itself. A quiet, resonant silence that spoke of absence rather than presence. A gentle confirmation of the void that had expanded to fill the spaces the gods had left behind. The beauty of a single wildflower blooming in a forgotten field, the intricate pattern of frost on a winter morning, the quiet strength of an ancient tree standing alone on a hill. These moments of natural beauty, once potentially seen as small gifts or manifestations of divine grace, now felt simply like the inherent wonder of the world itself. A beauty that was profound and undeniable, yet tinged with a gentle sadness for the lost layer of sacred meaning. A beauty that felt slightly diminished by the silent departure of the eyes that might have once admired it from beyond the veil. Her journey was a quiet pilgrimage, not to a sacred site, but to the vast, empty spaces left behind. A gentle, contemplative movement through a world that was slowly, silently, adjusting to the absence of its gods. And Elara, the last human witness, walked through it, carrying her burden like a quiet, precious stone, observing the subtle shifts, feeling the texture of the fading, a solitary figure in a world that was slowly forgetting the very essence of its own past. A quiet, melancholic presence in a landscape of gentle, profound change. The feel of the sun on her skin, the taste of clean water from a stream, the scent of pine needles crushed underfoot. These simple, physical sensations grounded her in the present moment, creating a quiet contrast with the vast, abstract nature of her burden. A gentle reminder that even in a world where the divine was fading, the simple, tangible reality of human existence persisted, quiet and enduring. She observed how the colors of the sunset seemed just as vibrant, the stars just as numerous in the night sky, the rivers just as determined in their flow. And yet, for her, they lacked a certain resonance, a subtle depth that had once been there, a gentle, almost imperceptible hollowness that only she seemed to notice, making the world feel like a beautifully rendered painting that lacked its soul. Her quiet wandering was not about finding answers or seeking a cure for her burden, but simply about being present in the process of the world's transformation, a gentle act of bearing witness to the quiet end of an era, finding a strange, melancholic peace in the simple act of walking through the fading reality, a quiet acceptance of her role as the last human observer of a grand, silent departure. She noticed the quiet resilience of the natural world, its capacity to simply continue, to adapt, to find its own balance in the absence of the divine architects it had once been intertwined with, a resilience that both comforted and saddened her, highlighting the world's ability to move on, a capacity she sometimes envied in her own quiet struggle to let go of the past. The path she followed was often overgrown, sometimes disappearing entirely, forcing her to find her own way, a physical challenge that mirrored her internal journey, navigating a world where the old paths, the old certainties provided by the gods, had vanished, leaving her to forge her own quiet, uncertain way through the new, empty landscape, a gentle metaphor for the human condition in a post-divine age. She spent quiet moments sitting by a stream, watching the water flow past, its constant movement a gentle reminder of the passage of time and the inevitability of change, contemplating how the water, like the world itself, simply continued its journey, indifferent to the grand shifts in the cosmic order, a quiet, flowing testament to the persistence of existence in the face of profound, silent loss, a gentle, melancholic truth. Her thoughts often returned to the concept of beauty in the absence, wondering if the natural world's quiet, inherent loveliness was enough to sustain the human spirit in a world stripped of its divine scaffolding, a question that had no easy answer, but lingered in her mind like the scent of damp earth after rain, a gentle, persistent inquiry that accompanied her steps. She felt a quiet kinship with the ancient trees, standing tall and silent, having witnessed centuries of change, perhaps even the slow departure of the very beings who are said to inhabit their groves, finding a gentle comfort in their enduring presence, a silent understanding between the last human witness and the ancient guardians of the earth, sharing the quiet weight of time and transformation. The landscapes she traversed held a quiet sadness, a sense of something vast having retreated, leaving behind an echo that only she could hear, a subtle resonance that others seemed oblivious to, making her feel like a ghost moving through a world that had moved on. A gentle, solitary figure carrying the quiet memory of a faded reality, a burden that was both isolating and strangely grounding, tying her to a history that others had forgotten. She observed the quiet way the light changed throughout the day, from the soft glow of dawn to the harsh brilliance of midday to the warm hues of sunset, seeing in this daily transformation a smaller, more intimate reflection of the grand, cosmic fading she witnessed on a larger scale, a gentle, natural cycle of presence and absence that mirrored the quiet departure of the divine, a constant visual reminder of the world's quiet, ongoing evolution. Her journey was a quiet act of defiance against the world's growing indifference, a gentle refusal to let the memory of the fading gods disappear entirely, a solitary pilgrimage undertaken not out of hope for their return, but out of a quiet sense of responsibility to bear witness, to remember, to feel the texture of the loss, a gentle, melancholic act of preservation in a world that was quietly moving on, leaving its sacred past behind like a forgotten dream. She sometimes found herself tracing the outlines of ancient, weathered symbols carved into rock faces or standing stones, symbols that once held power and meaning tied to the divine, now worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, their forms barely discernible, quiet testaments to a language of connection that was slowly, silently being erased, a gentle, physical manifestation of the fading she perceived on a spiritual level. The quiet sounds of the night, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle murmur of a stream became a form of quiet company, a natural symphony that filled the silence left by the departed divine voices, a comforting presence that lacked the power or the mystery of the past, but offered a simple, quiet solace in the vastness of the night, a gentle, natural lullaby for a world that was learning to sleep without its gods. Her internal landscape mirrored the physical one she traversed, a quiet expanse filled with the echoes of memory and the weight of knowledge, a place where the grand narrative of the fading gods intersected with the simple reality of her own human existence, creating a complex melancholic tapestry woven from sorrow, acceptance, and the quiet, persistent act of being, a gentle, internal journey reflecting the external one. The quiet observation of a spider spinning its intricate web between two branches, a small, fragile creation of delicate beauty, became a moment of quiet contemplation, seeing in the spider's patient work a reflection of the world's quiet, persistent creativity in the face of loss, a gentle reminder that even as grand structures of meaning faded, life in its myriad, simple forms continued to weave its own quiet, beautiful patterns, a subtle source of melancholic hope. She carried with her a quiet sense of paradox, feeling both intimately connected to the grand, cosmic event of the fading and profoundly detached from the ordinary human world that seemed oblivious to it, a gentle isolation that defined her existence, making her a bridge between a world that was and a world that was becoming, a solitary witness to a quiet, monumental transition. Her journey through the quiet, fading landscapes was not a search for answers, but a gentle immersion in the experience of loss itself, allowing the quiet sorrow to wash over her like a slow-moving tide, finding a strange, melancholic comfort in simply feeling the weight of the absence, a quiet acknowledgement of the profound change that had reshaped reality, leaving behind a world that was beautiful but undeniably diminished, a gentle, quiet truth that settled deep within her soul. Elara's slow-moving tide of quiet observation led her gently onward, finding a strange, melancholic comfort in simply feeling the weight of the absence, a quiet acknowledgement of the profound change that had reshaped reality, leaving behind a world that was beautiful but undeniably diminished, a gentle, quiet truth that settled deep within her soul. As her quiet journey continued, Elara began to encounter remnants of places that had been significantly touched by the fading gods, discovering crumbling ruins of ancient temples standing silent against the sky, oddly shaped natural formations associated with long-forgotten myths whispered in hushed tones, or stretches of land where the very air felt subtly different, perhaps heavier with unseen sorrow, or quieter than the surrounding wilderness, carrying a faint echo of departed power. She would spend hours observing these sites, not as places holding any current divine energy or presence, but rather as vast, open-air museums of absence, filled with a palpable sense of past significance that was now slowly eroding with each passing season, like intricate sand castles painstakingly built on the shore, inevitably returning to the indifferent tide, evoking within her a bittersweet feeling of connection to something immense and vast that was irrevocably slipping away from the world. These remnants spoke volumes in their silence, detailing the physical state of these forgotten places where the gods once walked or were honored, describing stones worn smooth by centuries of relentless rain and persistent wind, intricate carvings obscured by patient, creeping moss, and ancient altars now serving merely as sun-drenched resting places for birds building their nests, emphasizing their quiet integration back into the natural world as if they had never held sacred purpose, highlighting the finality of the gods' departure and the world's quiet, almost oblivious indifference to their profound absence. Exploring these sites stirred a complex array of emotions within Elara, a quiet reverence for what had once been mixed with a deep, pervasive sorrow for the loss she alone seemed to fully perceive, fostering a sense of being one of the very last guardians of their memory in a world that was rapidly forgetting, even as the physical structures themselves continued their slow, inevitable crumble into dust and earth, feeling the immense weight of history pressing down upon her and the quiet burden of being one of the vanishingly few who still perceived and felt its profound, silent loss. Among the stones and earth, Elara would often focus on a specific artifact or a unique feature within these ruins or natural locations. Perhaps a broken statue missing its head, a faded inscription on a crumbling wall rendered almost illegible by time, or a strangely silent grove of trees where no birds sang, and describe how it spoke to her, not of the gods' former power or grandeur, but instead of vulnerability and transience, mirroring her own simple human fragility in the face of such immense, quiet loss, serving as a gentle, melancholic reminder that even the divine, the seemingly eternal, could ultimately fade away. Each worn stone, each moss-covered carving, each silent grove became a chapter in a story only she was reading, a narrative of withdrawal and quiet dissolution that unfolded not in dramatic pronouncements, but in the slow, patient work of nature, reclaiming what had been set apart, illustrating the quiet, relentless process of the world moving on, leaving behind only these faint, physical whispers of a time when the air thrummed with a different kind of energy, a time now lost to all but her. The weight of the air in these places was a physical manifestation of the absence, a subtle pressure that settled on her shoulders, not heavy with dread, but with a profound, quiet melancholy, as if the very atmosphere held the collective sigh of a world letting go of its divine inhabitants, a feeling that resonated deep within Elara, mirroring the quiet ache in her chest that had accompanied her awareness from the beginning. She traced the lines of faded inscriptions, imagining the hands that had carved them, the faith that had driven the effort, and felt a pang of connection across the centuries, a connection to a human past that had been intertwined with the divine, a past that now felt as distant and unreachable as the gods themselves, leaving her anchored only to the quiet, empty present. The broken statue, perhaps of a deity whose name was now a forgotten echo, stood as a silent testament to fragility, its form eroded by time and weather, its power long since departed, a stark, physical representation of the cosmic fading she perceived, its stillness a mirror to the quiet, non-violent nature of the god's departure. Sitting among the ruins, Elara felt the earth beneath her, solid and enduring, indifferent to the rise and fall of divine beings, a quiet contrast to the transience she witnessed, grounding her in the simple, persistent reality of the physical world, even as her mind grappled with the invisible changes that had reshaped it. The oddly shaped natural formations, once perhaps seen as the footprints of giants or the tears of goddesses, now stood simply as geological curiosities, their mythical significance stripped away, leaving behind only the quiet, unassuming beauty of rock and earth, a quiet testament to the world's return to a simpler, less enchanted state. Elara ran her fingers over stones worn smooth by rain and wind, feeling the patient work of time, the slow, relentless erosion that mirrored the gradual fading of the gods, a process of dissolution that was not destructive, but simply transformative, a quiet return to the fundamental elements from which everything, perhaps even deities, might ultimately be composed. The altars, once places of sacrifice and communion, now served as silent pedestals for birds, their songs the only hymns sung in these spaces, a quiet irony that underscored the shift from sacred purpose to simple utility, highlighting the world's quiet indifference to the places where humanity had once sought connection with the divine. She saw the moss creeping over carvings, patiently obscuring the stories etched in stone, a slow, natural act of forgetting, a quiet parallel to humanity's own amnesia regarding the gods, illustrating how nature itself seemed to be participating in the process of fading, gently erasing the physical marks of their former presence. These places were not sad in a dramatic, mournful way, but held a quiet, pervasive melancholy, like the soft light of dusk settling over an empty field, a feeling that resonated with the gentle sorrow Elara carried within her, a shared understanding between the last human witness and the silent, crumbling remnants. Elara felt a quiet responsibility towards these places, a sense of being their temporary custodian, the one who still saw and remembered their former significance, even as the world around her hurried past, oblivious to the quiet history dissolving into the landscape, a gentle, solitary guardianship. The weight of history in these ruins was a physical sensation, a subtle pressure in the air, a quiet hum beneath the silence, reminding her of the vast span of time that had passed, the ages during which the gods were present, and the quiet, almost imperceptible shift that had led to their current absence, a weight she carried not as a burden of guilt, but of quiet, persistent awareness. Being one of the few who still perceived this loss was both isolating and profoundly meaningful, giving her quiet journey a purpose, however undefined, a mission to witness and remember what others had forgotten, a gentle, solitary task in a world that no longer needed or wanted the memory of its fading gods. The specific artifact, perhaps the broken statue, spoke to her most directly. Its shattered form and eroded features a powerful symbol, not of the gods' strength, but of their vulnerability, their capacity for fading, a quiet echo of the transience that touched everything, including the divine themselves, and by extension, her own fragile human existence. It was a gentle reminder, whispered by the wind through the broken stones, that even the most powerful beings were subject to the quiet forces of time and change, that permanence was an illusion, and that the most profound truths were often found not in grand displays of power, but in the quiet, melancholic beauty of things passing away. Elara lingered in these places, feeling the quiet resonance of absence, allowing the ancient stones and silent groves to speak their wordless language of fading, deepening her understanding of the burden she carried, not as a curse, but as a quiet, unique connection to a world that was slowly, gently slipping into memory. Her presence among the ruins was a quiet act of remembrance, a solitary ritual performed for an audience of stone and sky, a gentle acknowledgement of the profound, irreversible change that had swept through the world, leaving behind only these silent, crumbling testaments to a forgotten age, a quiet sorrow settling within her soul. The oddly shaped natural formations, once perhaps imbued with sacred meaning, now stood simply as beautiful, silent sculptures carved by the patient hand of nature, their forms speaking of geological time rather than divine intervention, a quiet shift in narrative that mirrored the larger cosmic fading. Elara felt a quiet kinship with these remnants, sharing their state of being left behind, of holding the echoes of a past that the present world no longer fully recognized or valued, a gentle, silent companionship in their shared experience of quiet fading. The faded inscription, almost illegible, felt like a secret whispered across time, a fragment of a conversation with the divine that had been interrupted, leaving only this tantalizing melancholic trace, a quiet reminder of the words exchanged in a world that now communicated only in silence. The strangely silent grove, untouched by the songs of birds, felt like a place holding its breath, a pocket of quiet resistance to the world's forgetting, or perhaps simply a place where the air was too heavy with the memory of divine silence for earthly sounds to penetrate, a gentle, eerie stillness. Elara understood that these places were not meant to be restored or revered in the old ways. Their purpose now was simply to exist as they were, quiet witnesses to the passage of time and the gentle departure of the sacred, and her purpose was simply to witness them. The sorrow she felt was not sharp or bitter, but a quiet, pervasive melancholy, like the feeling of watching a beloved friend drift slowly away into the distance, knowing they will not return. A gentle sadness that was now a constant companion in her heart. She felt the weight of being the last human witness, not as a heavy chains, but as a quiet cloak, woven from threads of memory and sorrow, a garment she wore constantly, its presence a quiet reminder of her unique place in a world that had moved on without its gods. The broken statue, with its missing head, seemed to gaze out over the landscape with a quiet, sightless acceptance. Its stillness, a lesson in enduring presence even in absence. A gentle, profound teaching that resonated with Elara's own quiet persistence. Elara's emotional response was a quiet dialogue with the past, a conversation held in the language of silence and feeling, a gentle communion with the echoes of a world that had been, a world now existing only in her memory and in these crumbling, forgotten places. She was a quiet custodian of the divine memory, not in grand acts of preservation, but in the simple act of seeing, feeling, and remembering. A gentle, solitary task performed with quiet reverence and a deep, abiding sorrow. These museums of absence were not desolate, but held a quiet, fragile beauty, the beauty of decay and return, of human creation yielding to nature's patient reclamation, a gentle, melancholic beauty that spoke of the quiet cycles of existence, including the fading of gods. Elara felt her own human fragility acutely in these places, her brief lifespan, a blink compared to the centuries that had shaped the ruins, her small awareness, a tiny echo of the vastness she mourned, a gentle reminder of her own transient place in the grand, quiet unfolding of time. The sense of connection she felt was not to the gods' power, which was gone, but to their memory, to the idea of them, to the human stories and places they had touched, a gentle, ephemeral bond across the void of their departure. The silence in these places was not an empty silence, but a filled silence, filled with the weight of history, the echoes of forgotten rituals, and the quiet presence of absence, a gentle, resonant silence that spoke volumes to Elara's attuned soul. She saw the world's quiet indifference to the god's absence, reflected in the unhurried growth of moss, the patient work of wind and rain, the simple, ongoing life of birds nesting in alders, a gentle, powerful testament to nature's resilience and focus on the present. Elara's quiet reverence was not worship, but a deep respect for the past, a gentle acknowledgement of the beings who had once shaped the world and human consciousness. A respect untainted by expectation or demand, simply a quiet honoring of memory. The sorrow was a quiet ache beneath her ribs, a constant, low-level hum that accompanied her observations, a gentle, pervasive feeling that was now as much a part of her as her breath or her heartbeat, a quiet sorrow for a world that had lost its divine dimension. Being one of the last guardians of their memory felt less like a duty and more like a quiet, inherent state of being, a natural consequence of her unique awareness, a gentle, solitary role she fulfilled simply by existing and perceiving. The physical state of the remnants, their slow return to Earth, was a quiet lesson in transience, a visual metaphor for the fading she witnessed on a cosmic scale, a gentle, profound truth embedded in stone and soil. Elara found a quiet, melancholic beauty in this process of return, in the way the human-made structures were yielding to the natural world, becoming one with the earth again, a gentle, peaceful dissolution. The specific artifact, perhaps the faded inscription, felt like a personal message left for her, a quiet confirmation that the gods had indeed been real, that her burden was not an illusion, a gentle validation of her solitary truth. It spoke of a language no longer understood, of a connection that had been severed, leaving behind only these quiet, enigmatic marks on stone, a gentle reminder of the knowledge that was slowly being lost to the world. Elara's emotional response was a quiet acceptance of this loss, a gentle embracing of the melancholy that accompanied it, understanding that this feeling was not a weakness, but a testament to the depth of her connection to the fading world, a quiet strength found in sorrow. She felt the weight of history not as a crushing burden, but as a quiet presence, a layer of time and memory settling over the landscape, and over her own soul, a gentle, persistent weight that grounded her in the quiet truth of the past. Being one of the few who still perceived this loss was a quiet, solitary existence, but not a lonely one in these moments among the ruins, where she felt a gentle kinship with the stones and the silence, sharing their quiet vigil. The broken statue was a quiet sermon on the impermanence of even the most powerful forms. Its stillness, a lesson in the quiet dignity of fading, a gentle, profound reflection that resonated deeply within Elara's contemplative heart. It mirrored her own human fragility, her own inevitable journey towards a quiet end, reminding her that the great cosmic fading was not separate from the small, personal fading of human life, but part of the same gentle, universal process. Elara left these places with a quiet understanding, a deeper sense of the burden she carried, not as a heavy weight to be shed, but as a quiet, integral part of her being, a gentle, melancholic truth that defined her unique existence in a world that had quietly moved on. The remnants were not just ruins, but quiet storytellers, whispering tales of absence and change, and Elara was the quiet listener, the one who still heard their gentle, sorrowful voices, carrying their stories forward in her heart. She felt a quiet sense of peace in this understanding, an acceptance of the world's transformation and her place within it, a gentle, contemplative peace that settled over her like the soft light of dusk, a quiet companion on her continued, aimless journey. The quiet indifference of the natural world to the gods' absence was a powerful, silent lesson, teaching Elara about resilience and the quiet persistence of life in its simplest forms, a gentle truth that offered a strange comfort amidst her sorrow. Elara's quiet reverence for the past was a gentle act of defiance against the world's forgetting, a solitary candle lit against the encroaching darkness of amnesia, a quiet commitment to remember what had been lost. The sorrow was a quiet river flowing through her, sometimes a gentle murmur, sometimes a deeper current, but always present, a constant reminder of the profound, quiet change that had reshaped her reality and the world around her. Being one of the last guardians felt less like a duty and more like a quiet, inherent state of being, a natural consequence of her unique awareness, a gentle, solitary role she fulfilled simply by existing and perceiving the quiet truth. The physical state of the remnants, their slow return to Earth, was a quiet lesson in transience, a visual metaphor for the fading she witnessed on a cosmic scale, a gentle, profound truth embedded in stone and soil. Speaking of quiet cycles, Elara found a quiet, melancholic beauty in this process of return, in the way the human-made structures were yielding to the natural world, becoming one with the earth again, a gentle, peaceful dissolution that mirrored the quiet departure of the gods. A specific artifact, perhaps the faded inscription, felt like a personal message left for her, a quiet confirmation that the gods had indeed been real, that her burden was not an illusion, a gentle validation of her solitary truth in a world of forgetting. It spoke of a language no longer understood, of a connection that had been severed, leaving behind only these quiet, enigmatic marks on stone, a gentle reminder of the knowledge that was slowly being lost to the world, a quiet sorrow etched in time. Elara's emotional response was a quiet acceptance of this loss, a gentle embracing of the melancholy that accompanied it, understanding that this feeling was not a weakness, but a testament to the depth of her connection to the fading world, a quiet strength found in sorrow and quiet remembrance. She felt the weight of history, not as a crushing burden, but as a quiet presence, a layer of time and memory settling over the landscape, and over her own soul, a gentle, persistent weight that grounded her in the quiet truth of the past and the profound changes it represented. Being one of the few who still perceived this loss was a quiet, solitary existence, but not a lonely one in these moments among the ruins, where she felt a gentle kinship with the stones and the silence, sharing their quiet vigil for a world that had been. The broken statue was a quiet sermon on the impermanence of even the most powerful forms, its stillness a lesson in the quiet dignity of fading, a gentle, profound reflection that resonated deeply within Elara's contemplative heart, speaking of quiet endings. It mirrored her own human fragility, her own inevitable journey towards a quiet end, reminding her that the great cosmic fading was not separate from the small, personal fading of human life, but part of the same gentle, universal process of quiet dissolution. Elara left these places with a quiet understanding, a deeper sense of the burden she carried, not as a heavy weight to be shed, but as a quiet, integral part of her being, a gentle, melancholic truth that defined her unique existence in a world that had quietly moved on from its divine past. The remnants were not just ruins, but quiet storytellers, whispering tales of absence and change, and Elara was the quiet listener, the one who still heard their gentle, sorrowful voices, carrying their stories forward in her heart, a quiet echo in the present. She felt a quiet sense of peace in this understanding, an acceptance of the world's transformation and her place within it, a gentle, contemplative peace that settled over her like the soft light of dusk, a quiet companion on her continued, aimless journey through a world reborn in silence. The quiet indifference of the natural world to the god's absence was a powerful, silent lesson, teaching Elara about resilience and the quiet persistence of life in its simplest forms. A gentle truth that offered a strange comfort amidst her sorrow for the divine. Elara's quiet reverence for the past was a gentle act of defiance against the world's forgetting, a solitary candle lit against the encroaching darkness of amnesia, a quiet commitment to remember what had been lost, a silent vigil in the fading light. The sorrow was a quiet river flowing through her, sometimes a gentle murmur, sometimes a deeper current, but always present, a constant reminder of the profound, quiet change that had reshaped her reality and the world around her, a gentle, persistent ache. Being one of the last guardians felt less like a duty and more like a quiet, inherent state of being, a natural consequence of her unique awareness, a gentle, solitary role she fulfilled simply by existing and perceiving the quiet truth of the world's transformation. The physical state of the remnants, their slow return to earth, was a quiet lesson in transience, a visual metaphor for the fading she witnessed on a cosmic scale, a gentle, profound truth embedded in stone and soil, speaking of quiet cycles of existence and dissolution. Elara found a quiet, melancholic beauty in this process of return, in the way the human-made structures were yielding to the natural world, becoming one with the earth again, a gentle, peaceful dissolution that mirrored the quiet departure of the gods from the fabric of reality. The specific artifact, perhaps the faded inscription, felt like a personal message left for her, a quiet confirmation that the gods had indeed been real, that her burden was not an illusion, a gentle validation of her solitary truth in a world of comfortable ignorance. It spoke of a language no longer understood, of a connection that had been severed, leaving behind only these quiet, enigmatic marks on stone, a gentle reminder of the knowledge that was slowly being lost to the world. a quiet sorrow etched into the very stone. Elara's emotional response was a quiet acceptance of this loss, a gentle embracing of the melancholy that accompanied it, understanding that this feeling was not a weakness, but a testament to the depth of her connection to the fading world, a quiet strength found in sorrow and the quiet act of witnessing. She felt the weight of history not as a crushing burden, but as a quiet presence, a layer of time and memory settling over the landscape, and over her own soul, a gentle, persistent weight that grounded her in the quiet truth of the past and the profound changes it represented, a quiet companion. Being one of the few who still perceived this loss was a quiet, solitary existence, but not a lonely one in these moments among the ruins, where she felt a gentle kinship with the stones and the silence, sharing their quiet vigil for a world that had been, a silent community of remembrance. The broken statue was a quiet sermon on the impermanence of even the most powerful forms, its stillness a lesson in the quiet dignity of fading, a gentle, profound reflection that resonated deeply within Elara's contemplative heart, speaking of quiet endings and transformations. It mirrored her own human fragility, her own inevitable journey towards a quiet end, reminding her that the great cosmic fading was not separate from the small, personal fading of human life, but part of the same gentle, universal process of quiet dissolution and return. Elara left these places with a quiet understanding, a deeper sense of the burden she carried, not as a heavy weight to be shed, but as a quiet, integral part of her being, a gentle, melancholic truth that defined her unique existence in a world that had quietly moved on from its divine past into a new, quieter era. The remnants were not just ruins, but quiet storytellers, whispering tales of absence and change, and Elara was the quiet listener, the one who still heard their gentle, sorrowful voices, carrying their stories forward in her heart, a quiet echo in the present, a bridge to the past. She felt a quiet sense of peace in this understanding, an acceptance of the world's transformation and her place within it, a gentle, contemplative peace that settled over her like the soft light of dusk, a quiet companion on her continued, aimless journey through a world reborn in silence and gentle melancholy. The quiet indifference of the natural world to the god's absence was a powerful, silent lesson, teaching Elara about resilience and the quiet persistence of life in its simplest forms, a gentle truth that offered a strange comfort amidst her sorrow for the divine, a quiet strength. Elara's quiet reverence for the past was a gentle act of defiance against the world's forgetting, a solitary candle lit against the encroaching darkness of amnesia, a quiet commitment to remember what had been lost, a silent vigil in the fading light of history. The sorrow was a quiet river flowing through her, sometimes a gentle murmur, sometimes a deeper current, but always present, a constant reminder of the profound, quiet change that had reshaped her reality and the world around her, a gentle, persistent ache in her soul. Being one of the last guardians felt less like a duty and more like a quiet, inherent state of being, a natural consequence of her unique awareness, a gentle, solitary role she fulfilled, simply by existing and perceiving the quiet truth of the world's transformation and the god's departure. The physical state of the remnants, their slow return to earth, was a quiet lesson in transience, a visual metaphor for the fading she witnessed on a cosmic scale, a gentle, profound truth embedded in stone and soil, speaking of quiet cycles of existence, transformation, and dissolution. Elara found a quiet, melancholic beauty in this process of return, in the way the human-made structures were yielding to the natural world, becoming one with the earth again, a gentle, peaceful dissolution that mirrored the quiet departure of the gods from the fabric of reality and human consciousness. The specific artifact, perhaps the faded inscription, felt like a personal message left for her, a quiet confirmation that the gods had indeed been real, that her burden was not an illusion, a gentle validation of her solitary truth in a world of comfortable ignorance and forgetting. It spoke of a language no longer understood, of a connection that had been severed, leaving behind only these quiet, enigmatic marks on stone, a gentle reminder of the knowledge that was slowly being lost to the world. A quiet sorrow etched into the very stone by time and fading. Elara's emotional response was a quiet acceptance of this loss, a gentle embracing of the melancholy that accompanied it, understanding that this feeling was not a weakness, but a testament to the depth of her connection to the fading world, a quiet strength found in sorrow, and the quiet act of witnessing its profound, silent change. She felt the weight of history, not as a crushing burden, but as a quiet presence, a layer of time and memory settling over the landscape, and over her own soul, a gentle, persistent weight that grounded her in the quiet truth of the past and the profound changes it represented, a quiet companion on her journey. Being one of the few who still perceived this loss was a quiet, solitary existence, but not a lonely one in these moments among the ruins, where she felt a gentle kinship with the stones and the silence, sharing their quiet vigil for a world that had been, a silent community of remembrance in the fading light. The broken statue was a quiet sermon on the impermanence of even the most powerful forms. Its stillness, a lesson in the quiet dignity of fading, a gentle, profound reflection that resonated deeply within Elara's contemplative heart, speaking of quiet endings, transformations, and the gentle persistence of memory. It mirrored her own human fragility, her own inevitable journey towards a quiet end, reminding her that the great cosmic fading was not separate from the small, personal fading of human life, but part of the same gentle, universal process of quiet dissolution and return to the earth. Elara left these places with a quiet understanding, a deeper sense of the burden she carried, not as a heavy weight to be shed, but as a quiet, integral part of her being, a gentle, melancholic truth that defined her unique existence in a world that had quietly moved on from its divine past into a new, quieter era of human focus. The remnants were not just ruins, but quiet storytellers, whispering tales of absence and change, and Elara was the quiet listener, the one who still heard their gentle, sorrowful voices, carrying their stories forward in her heart, a quiet echo in the present, a bridge between worlds. She felt a quiet sense of peace in this understanding, an acceptance of the world's transformation and her place within it, a gentle, contemplative peace that settled over her like the soft light of dusk, a quiet companion on her continued, aimless journey through a world reborn in silence and gentle melancholy, a world that was hers to quietly witness. As Elara continued her quiet, aimless journey through a world reborn in silence and gentle melancholy, a world that was hers to quietly witness after having accepted its profound transformation and her singular place within it, she began to encounter other humans moving through their days, their lives woven into the tapestry of the land she wandered. She saw farmers bent over fertile fields, their hands deep in the soil, their concerns tied to the rhythm of the seasons and the yield of the earth, their faces etched with the simple, immediate worries of weather and harvest. Merchants traveled dusty roads, their carts laden with goods, their conversations focused on trade routes, prices, and the ebb and flow of commerce between distant towns, their world defined by tangible exchanges and practical negotiations. Families gathered in small villages, nestled in valleys, or perched on hillsides, their days filled with the sounds of children playing, the chores of home, and the quiet dramas of relationships, their existence grounded entirely in the human sphere, untouched by the vast, silent departure that occupied Elara's thoughts. Observing these lives, Elara felt a profound, quiet disconnect, a sense of being both among them and utterly separate, her inner landscape dominated by the weight of cosmic fading, while their reality remained firmly rooted in the immediate, the tangible, the human. She would offer brief greetings sometimes, simple exchanges about the heat of the sun or the condition of the road ahead. And in these moments of superficial connection, the chasm between her inner world and theirs felt most stark, a quiet ache beneath the politeness. Their eyes held no recognition of the grand, slow departure she perceived, no hint of the void left by the gods, only the everyday light of human concerns, reinforcing her unique, isolating perspective. The quiet pain of knowing something so fundamental had changed while others remained beautifully, painfully unaware, or simply indifferent to the loss. This paradox of sharing a world with people whose experience of it was fundamentally different from her own was a constant, gentle weight, illustrating the loneliness of her burden, the quiet ache of being the last witness to a reality that was fading even from human memory. Elara noticed the various ways people interacted with the lingering hints of the old ways or stories, how some would dismiss them with a wave of the hand, labeling them as quaint superstition or old wives' tales, their practicality leaving no room for the echoes of the divine. Others held on to them as beloved traditions, recounting myths at festivals or keeping small, warm charms, but their reverence was for folklore, for history, not for a living, breathing presence, emphasizing the loneliness of being the last witness who felt the true, ongoing absence. None seemed to feel the visceral void, the quiet emptiness that Elara carried within her, the sense of a fundamental layer of existence having peeled away, leaving behind a world that felt subtly, profoundly different to her senses, highlighting her solitary vigil in a world that had moved on. She often found herself observing a specific scene of human interaction, like watching children play tag in the shadow of an old, forgotten monument. Its stones once perhaps are a temple or a sacred site, now merely a backdrop for their laughter and simple games. Or she might sit quietly nearby, listening to adults discuss local politics or the price of grain near a place that was once significant in divine lore. Perhaps a spring where offerings were made, or a hill where a god was said to have rested, feeling the quiet triumph of ordinary human life in the face of cosmic indifference. These moments underscored Elara's own gentle melancholy at being unable to fully participate in that simpler reality, the human world with its immediate joys and sorrows, its grounded concerns and vibrant, mundane connections, felt distant to her, filtered through the lens of her unique, heavy knowledge. She longed sometimes for the ease of their unawareness, the comfort of their grounded reality, free from the pervasive awareness of the vast, silent departure that colored her every perception. A quiet yearning for a life she could not fully inhabit. Yet, there was also a quiet reverence in her observation, a recognition of the resilience and beauty in the human spirit's ability to find meaning and connection in the absence of the divine, a quiet strength that existed independently of the cosmic order. Elara saw their small acts of kindness, their shared laughter, their communal efforts to build and sustain their lives, and she understood that this was the core of the world now, the human heart beating steadily, even as the divine pulse faded to silence. Her burden was to remember, to witness, but theirs was to live, to build, to find joy and sorrow in the immediate. And the contrast was a source of gentle sorrow and quiet awe for her, a constant reminder of the two parallel realities existing side by side. She walked on, a silent observer, carrying the weight of a world they could not see, her journey marked by the quiet rhythm of her steps and the gentle hum of her unique, unshareable knowledge, moving through landscapes filled with human life that felt both familiar and profoundly alien to her burdened soul. Every village she passed through, every field she skirted, every road she shared with others, served as a quiet testament to the world that remained, the human world, vibrant and oblivious, thriving in the space left by the fading gods, a constant, gentle ache in Elara's awareness. She felt a kinship with the ancient stones of the forgotten monument, the silent spring, the quiet hill, all holding echoes of a past that was rapidly becoming just a story, a feeling that they, like her, were witnesses to a profound, quiet transformation that the bustling human world seemed determined to ignore or forget. The simple greetings she exchanged felt like whispers across an infinite distance, her words about the weather carrying the unspoken weight of cosmic change, their replies grounded in the immediate, highlighting the gentle irony of her situation, a prophet of absence in a world that needed no prophecy. Her isolation was not a dramatic solitude, but a quiet, pervasive feeling, like a mist that never fully lifted, separating her gently from the warmth and ease of ordinary human connection, leaving her to walk her path alone with the silent companions of her unique perception. The burden was not a heavy stone she carried, but a part of her very being, like an extra sense that perceived the world through a different lens, a lens that showed her the beauty of human life, but also the profound, quiet tragedy of their collective amnesia. She paused sometimes by the edge of a village, watching the smoke rise from chimneys, listening to the distant sounds of human activity, a gentle melancholy settling over her, a quiet longing to belong fully to that world, while knowing she never could, her soul forever attuned to the vanishing. The contrast was a constant source of quiet contemplation, the vibrant, immediate reality of human life set against the backdrop of a fading cosmic order, a silent drama that played out only within her own consciousness, making the simplest human interactions feel imbued with a strange, gentle significance. She recognized the quiet strength in their focus on the present, their ability to find meaning in the human, the tangible, the here and now, a strength that she admired even as she felt estranged from its uncomplicated purity, her own strength tied to the act of quiet remembrance. Elara understood that her path was different, solitary, defined by a knowledge that set her apart. And while there was sorrow in that isolation, there was also a quiet sense of purpose, a gentle responsibility to bear witness, even if only for herself, to the world as it truly was, in its fading glory and its resilient human heart. And so, she continued her quiet journey, moving among the bustling lives of others, a silent observer carrying the weight of a vanishing world, her presence a gentle reminder of the unseen, the forgotten, the profound quiet that had settled over existence, a quiet sorrow that was her constant, gentle companion. Her interactions with the people she met, however brief, were like small, delicate threads connecting her to the human tapestry, threads that she cherished, even as she felt the fundamental difference of her own weave, a unique pattern shaped by the knowledge of absence. She saw the future in their faces, a future built on human foundations, strong and resilient, but lacking the transcendent layer, the divine resonance that had once imbued the world with mystery and awe, a future that felt both hopeful and quietly diminished to her perception. The laughter of children playing near the ancient monument was a sound both beautiful and poignant, a testament to life's continuation, yet a quiet echo of the silence that now surrounded the stones, a silence where divine whispers once might have been heard, a gentle melancholy for the lost echoes. Listening to the adults discuss their crops and families near the silent spring, Elara felt the quiet power of their grounded concerns. There lives a quiet assertion of human relevance in a universe that seemed increasingly indifferent, a gentle triumph of the ordinary. Her own thoughts, filled with the vastness of cosmic change, felt distant and abstract compared to their immediate realities, like trying to describe the color of the wind to someone who only knows the texture of stone, highlighting the profound, quiet gap between their worlds. The burden of her unique perspective was not a shouted truth, but a quiet, constant hum beneath the surface of her consciousness, a gentle reminder that she saw a different world than the one others inhabited, a world that was slowly, silently shedding its sacred skin. She envied their ability to find comfort in the mundane, to be fully present in the human now, free from the weight of cosmic memory, a gentle longing that was intertwined with her quiet acceptance of her own path, her own unique way of being in the world. Elara knew that her role was not to awaken them, to share a burden they could not bear, but simply to witness, to remember, to carry the quiet weight of the fading within her own soul, a solitary act of gentle remembrance in a world that was forgetting. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the fields where farmers had toiled, over the roads where merchants had traveled, over the villages where families had gathered, Elara watched. a quiet figure on the edge of their world, her heart filled with a gentle melancholy for the gods who were gone, and the humans who remained, building their lives in the quiet absence. Her journey was not towards a destination, but through a state of being, a quiet wandering through a world that was both familiar and profoundly changed, her steps marked by the rhythm of her thoughts and the gentle weight of her unique, solitary knowledge, a knowledge that was both a burden and a quiet, strange gift. She was the last human witness, not to a dramatic end, but to a slow, quiet departure, and her life was a testament to the gentle persistence of memory and the quiet sorrow of seeing what others could not. A solitary vigil in a world that had found new ways to thrive in the silence. Her connection to the fading gods was a thread of melancholy woven into the fabric of her days, a quiet reminder of the transcendent layer that had peeled away, leaving the human world bare but resilient, a world that Elara observed with a mixture of quiet sorrow and gentle admiration. The simplicity of the human lives she encountered highlighted the complexity of her own internal landscape, a landscape shaped by the echoes of divine absence, a quiet contrast that defined her journey and her unique, solitary experience of existence in a world that was quietly transforming. She continued her walk, a silent figure moving through the gathering dusk, the sounds of human life fading behind her, leaving her once again with the quiet company of her thoughts and the gentle, pervasive weight of being the last witness to the fading of the ancient gods, a burden she carried with quiet grace and gentle melancholy. As the quiet understanding began to settle within her, a subtle shift occurred in Elara's perception, a deepening awareness of the internal conflict that had become a constant companion on her quiet journey through a world that was slowly forgetting. There was a part of her, a weary, deeply human part, that yearned with a quiet intensity to shed the immense burden of being the last witness, to simply let go of the fading gods and their silent departure, to forget the subtle signs and live a normal, uncomplicated human life, free from the weight of unseen cosmic shifts. This yearning was not a sudden, dramatic desire, but a gentle, persistent ache, a quiet voice within her that whispered of the peace found in ignorance, of the simple joy of seeing the world as merely earth and sky and human concerns, without the haunting awareness of a vanishing divine presence. Yet, intertwined with this longing for release was another part, a quiet but unyielding sense of inexplicable responsibility, a feeling that she was somehow obligated to remember, to hold on to the knowledge of the fading gods, however painful or isolating that remembrance might be in a world that had moved on. This dual nature of her existence, caught between the desire for ordinary peace and the pull of extraordinary, sorrowful knowledge, defined the quiet tension that lived within her soul. A silent battle fought not with swords or shouts, but with the gentle, persistent pressure of conflicting inner truths. She found herself in moments of quiet rebellion against the burden she carried, fleeting periods where she would deliberately try to ignore the subtle signs of the fading, the almost imperceptible dimming of ancient energies, convincing herself that it was all just her imagination, a trick of the light, a lingering echo of old stories in a mind too sensitive to let them go completely. These moments of attempted denial brought a brief, fragile semblance of normalcy, a taste of the quiet peace she longed for, but they were always temporary, shattered by the undeniable, if subtle, reality of the fading, by the quiet ache in her chest that served as a constant, gentle reminder of her unique and solitary awareness. Her dissatisfaction with her own inability to simply let go and find peace in ignorance was a quiet source of frustration, a gentle self-reproach for not being able to choose the simpler path, for being tethered to a vanishing world that brought her only sorrow and isolation, while the bustling human world offered a different, perhaps shallower, but undeniably easier existence. She observed others, immersed in their daily lives, their concerns centered on tangible realities, the success of a harvest, the news from a neighboring town, the simple joys and sorrows of family, and she felt a gentle envy for their uncomplicated connection to the present. their freedom from the weight of a past that was actively, quietly dissolving. This paradoxical nature of her connection to the fading gods was a constant source of quiet contemplation. It was undeniably a source of profound sorrow and deep isolation, setting her apart from the shared human experience, marking her as different in a way she could never fully explain or share, a silent burden that weighed heavily upon her heart. Yet, in the quiet moments of reflection, she also felt that this connection, this heavy burden of remembrance, was also the most significant part of her existence, the thing that set her apart, not just in sorrow, but in purpose, giving her a unique, albeit heavy, role in a world that otherwise felt increasingly meaningless and disconnected from anything larger than itself. It was as if the fading gods, in their quiet departure, had left a void that only her awareness could partially fill, making her sorrowful connection feel like a strange form of guardianship, a gentle, lonely vigil over a vanishing truth that no one else seemed to perceive or care about. This connection, though born of loss, felt like a thread, fragile yet strong, linking her to something vast and ancient, something that had once shaped the very fabric of the world, and its presence within her, however faint, gave her quiet life a strange, melancholic significance it would otherwise lack. She explored the quiet frustration she felt towards herself, for being unable to reconcile these conflicting desires, for being perpetually caught between the grounded human world she inhabited and the subtle, vanishing world she perceived, a constant state of being adrift between two realities, neither of which she could fully embrace without abandoning the other. This internal struggle was not a violent storm within her soul, but a gentle, persistent ache, a core tension that defined the quiet rhythm of her days, coloring her perceptions with a subtle sadness, a constant awareness of the unseen barrier that separated her inner world from the shared reality of those around her. She would often sit alone under the vast expanse of the stars, their distant, indifferent light mirroring the cosmic scale of the fading, and engage in a silent internal debate with herself, weighing the quiet peace that oblivion promised against the heavy weight of remembrance that she inexplicably felt compelled to carry, a gentle, ongoing negotiation with her own soul. She would ask herself, in the quiet stillness of the night, if the serenity of forgetting was not a more desirable state than the sorrowful clarity of knowing, if a life lived in comfortable ignorance was not ultimately richer and more peaceful than one burdened by the knowledge of a grand, silent departure. But the answer never came easily, for the knowledge, however painful, felt intrinsically woven into the fabric of who she was, a part of her identity she could no more shed than she could shed her own skin, making the debate less about choice and more about the quiet acceptance of an inherent, burdensome truth. Sitting by a quiet stream, the gentle murmur of the water a soothing counterpoint to the quiet turmoil within her, she would contemplate the simplicity of the natural world, its cycles of growth and decay, its apparent indifference to the grand dramas of gods and mortals, and wonder why she alone seemed burdened by this cosmic melancholy. She saw the water flow, the leaves fall, the sun set, all quiet processes of change and departure, and recognized in them a reflection of the fading she witnessed on a grander scale. Yet the world of nature seemed to accept these changes with a quiet grace that she found difficult to emulate in her own struggle with loss. Her internal battle was a constant, low-level hum beneath the surface of her quiet life, a persistent ache that never fully subsided, a reminder that her existence was defined by this unique, isolating awareness, this gentle burden of being the last human witness to the fading of ancient gods, a fate she carried with quiet resignation and profound, at times, a weary, gentle, melancholic pride in her lonely vigil. She understood that this conflict was not something to be resolved with a single decision or a dramatic act, but was simply the state of her being, the quiet tension of a soul caught between the world that was and the world that was quietly ceasing to be, a gentle sorrow that was as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. Even in moments of brief connection with others, The quiet hum of her burden was always present, a subtle barrier that prevented her from fully immersing herself in their shared reality, reminding her that her perception of the world was fundamentally different, tinged with a melancholy they could not see or feel, a gentle isolation she carried with quiet grace. She longed, in her quiet moments, for someone to share the burden with, someone else who could see the subtle signs, who could feel the quiet ache of the fading. But she knew in her heart that she was alone, the last human tethered to a world that was slowly, quietly slipping away, leaving her with the heavy, gentle weight of remembrance. This persistent internal debate, the quiet weighing of peace against knowledge, of oblivion against remembrance, was the quiet core of her burden, a tension that shaped her thoughts, her feelings, her very way of being in a world that was both familiar and profoundly alien in its quiet indifference to the grand departure she witnessed, a gentle sorrow that was her constant companion. She sometimes imagined what it would be like to wake up one morning and find the burden gone, the awareness lifted, to see the world with the simple clarity of others, unburdened by the knowledge of the fading, and the thought brought a quiet, aching longing, a gentle whisper of a life she could never truly have while the knowledge remained. But the knowledge persisted, a quiet hum in her soul, a gentle pressure behind her eyes, a constant reminder of the vast, silent departure she was witnessing, making the internal debate a perpetual, quiet negotiation with her own reality, a gentle struggle that defined the quiet landscape of her inner life, a landscape colored by the subtle hues of melancholy and the quiet weight of remembrance she carried alone. She accepted, in her quiet way, that this internal conflict was not a temporary state, but a fundamental aspect of her existence as the last witness, a gentle, persistent ache that would likely remain with her until her own quiet fading, a reminder of the world that was, and the burden of having been the one left behind to remember its quiet departure, a gentle sorrow that was hers alone to bear in the silence of the world. Elara found a place of deep solitude, perhaps a high, wind-swept ridge where the air was thin and carried the scent of distant rain, or maybe a secluded cave carved into the mountainside, a haven of quiet stone, and in this chosen sanctuary, she entered a period of intense, quiet introspection, contemplating the very nature of belief itself, the fragility of memory, and the fundamental human need for something perceived as being beyond the mundane, something larger than the self. She described the vastness of the sky, stretching endlessly above her, a canvas of deepening blue transitioning to the first hint of stars, and the profound silence of the earth around her, broken only by the whisper of the wind or the faint calls of unseen creatures. And she felt how this immense physical expanse seemed to mirror the complex existential questions that now filled her mind with a quiet, persistent hum, questions about what truly remains within the human spirit when the ancient anchors of the divine are undeniably gone from the world. What does it truly mean, she pondered, to be simply human in a world that feels increasingly empty of transcendent meaning? A world where the sense of the sacred has receded like an outgoing tide, leaving behind shores that are beautiful but strangely bare, lacking the vibrant, mysterious life they once held when the gods walked among them, or their presence was deeply felt in the rustling leaves and the flowing water. She detailed her reflections on the pervasive process of forgetting, both the slow erosion of personal memories and the grand, collective amnesia of humanity, and how the quiet fading of the gods seemed to be subtly mirrored by humanity's own gradual shedding of the sacred, a quiet dismissal or neglect that left a profound void in the collective consciousness, a feeling of being adrift without a celestial compass to guide their way through the vast, often bewildering, landscape of existence. She explored the intricate concept of the existential burden, the quiet, heavy weight of consciousness itself in a seemingly indifferent universe, a weight amplified significantly for Elara by her unique and solitary awareness of the divine withdrawal, and how this profound burden was not experienced as a sudden, dramatic crisis, but rather as a slow, pervasive pressure, a constant, low-level companion that settled beside her in her solitude, a silent observer of her quiet grief. She focused on a specific philosophical question that occupied her thoughts during these moments of deep contemplation, perhaps a question related to the fundamental nature of reality itself, or the elusive purpose of human existence in a world increasingly devoid of external, divine validation, or the quiet, inherent tragedy of beings who possess the capacity to create profound meaning only to be forced to watch it inevitably fade and dissolve into the mists of time, describing how these ponderings were not merely academic exercises, but deeply felt anxieties that resonated profoundly with the quiet sorrow already present in her soul, a sorrow that was the silent echo of the god's departure. She considered the subtle, almost imperceptible ways that the world had changed, not with a cataclysmic roar, but with a gentle sigh, leaving behind a quiet emptiness where once there was a vibrant, unseen presence, and she felt this absence in the way the light fell differently upon the ancient stones, in the way the wind moved through the trees, without carrying the whispers of divine names, in the way the silence in sacred groves felt like an abandonment rather than a reverence. This quiet transformation of the world felt like a slow, deliberate exhale, spanning centuries, a cosmic breath leaving a body that continued to live but was fundamentally altered. And Elara, uniquely attuned to this subtle shift, felt the corresponding emptiness growing within her own soul, a void that mirrored the one she perceived in the fabric of existence itself, a shared sorrow between the world and the last human who truly saw its change. Her home, a simple dwelling nestled on the edge of a town that bustled with the everyday concerns of human life, anxieties about crops and trade and relationships, felt both familiar and profoundly apart, a paradox that defined her existence, highlighting her feeling of being simultaneously present in the human world and profoundly distant from its immediate reality, burdened by a knowledge others lacked or had comfortably dismissed as mere folklore, a weight that settled quietly upon her shoulders each morning. She recalled her initial, hesitant attempts to articulate this burden to others, the polite smiles of dismissal, the blank stares of incomprehension, the gentle pats on the hand as if she were speaking of childish fantasies, experiences that solidified her solitary role as the last human witness and deepened the quiet weight of her unique, unshareable reality, a truth held only within the confines of her own heart, a secret sorrow. She thought about the nature of the fading gods, not a violent end marked by thunder and fire, but a slow, almost imperceptible withdrawal, like breath leaving a body over centuries, a process so gradual that most of humanity had failed to notice, adapting to the absence without ever registering the departure itself, and how Elara felt this absence not as a lack of power or a sudden void, but as a growing emptiness in the very fabric of existence, mirroring the emptiness she sensed growing within her own soul, a quiet, pervasive ache. Her mundane activities, fetching water from the well, tending her small garden, engaging in brief interactions with neighbors about trivial matters, all served to emphasize the stark contrast between the quiet cosmic drama unfolding within her and the ordinary rhythm of human life around her, a rhythm that continued with relentless normalcy, untouched by the vast, silent departure she alone perceived. This paradox of living in a world where the extraordinary was vanishing, yet the everyday continued its predictable course, left Elara with a strange detachment from the concerns of others, finding their anxieties and joys distant echoes compared to the silent, grand departure she observed, a silent observer in a world that had moved on without noticing the monumental change. Her walks through familiar landscapes, the market square, the worn path to the river, the edge of the whispering woods, were now tinged with melancholy, noticing how places once imbued with divine tales and vibrant presences now seemed merely themselves, stripped of their mythical resonance, leaving behind a quiet, disorienting emptiness, a landscape that felt both known and profoundly alien in its newfound silence. She listened to interactions where people spoke of the past, of old stories or traditions, but with a tone of fond nostalgia for quaint folklore, rather than reverence for present power, and how Elara stood or sat among them, a silent observer holding the knowledge of the true, ongoing loss, feeling the quiet weight of their comfortable ignorance like a physical pressure in her chest, a lonely guardian of a truth no one else wished to acknowledge. Focusing on a specific mundane task, like mending a torn garment by the window light, or preparing a simple meal of bread and cheese, she would interweave her thoughts about the fading gods with the physical actions, illustrating how the burden she carried was not a dramatic event demanding grand gestures, but a constant, low-level hum beneath the surface of her ordinary existence, a gentle, pervasive sorrow that was simply a part of her now, like the rhythm of her own breathing. She spent time recalling fragmented memories or faint echoes of the time when the gods were more present, perhaps inherited stories passed down through generations of her ancestors, or faint personal impressions from her own youth, focusing on the sensory details of a world that felt different, more alive with unseen forces, a world that vibrated with a power that was now noticeably absent. She contrasted the vibrant, though sometimes fearful, world of those memories with the quiet, muted reality of the present, describing the sharp pang of longing for a time that felt more connected, more significant, even if that connection came with its own burdens and demands. A time when the universe felt smaller, more personal, more directly engaged with human life. Visiting an ancient, neglected shrine or a place where an old ritual was once performed, she noticed the dust settling thick upon the crumbling stones, the decay creeping in like a silent thief, the indifference of nature slowly reclaiming the space, and how these physical signs of abandonment mirrored the spiritual void Elara perceived, stirring a deep, quiet sadness within her soul, a sense of profound loss for what was once there. She explored the bittersweet feeling of remembering the power and presence of the gods, the awe they inspired, the fear they could instill, the sense of belonging to a larger cosmic order that their existence provided, and how this memory now served only to highlight the vast extent of the loss, leaving a hollow space in the world and within her own heart, where that vital connection used to reside, a silent ache that nothing seemed able to fill. Focusing on a specific forgotten ritual or a fragment of a myth that Elara remembered, detailing its meaning and purpose in the distant past, she would then contemplate its utter lack of relevance or power in the present day, illustrating how the loss was not just of beings, but of the very structure and meaning they provided to the human world, leaving humanity adrift in a quiet, directionless sea, navigating by stars that felt cold and indifferent. Elara decided to undertake a slow, aimless journey, not motivated by a specific goal or the hope of a grand revelation, but by an unarticulated need to witness the fading on a larger scale, to feel the texture of the world's quiet transformation beneath her own feet, a pilgrimage of sorrow rather than salvation, a quiet wandering through a world that was slowly forgetting itself. She described the landscapes she passed through, rolling hills that seemed to hold their breath, quiet forests where the ancient whispers had fallen silent, meandering rivers that flowed with water that felt merely like water, focusing on how these places, once potentially resonant with divine stories or presences, now felt simply like earth and water and trees, beautiful in their own right, perhaps, but stripped of a layer of transcendent meaning, a subtle impoverishment of the soul of the land. She detailed the physical experience of the journey, the feel of the ground beneath her worn boots, the subtle changes in the air as she moved from valley to plain, the simple sounds of mundane nature, birdsong, insect hum, the rustle of leaves, contrasting the simplicity of the physical act with the complex, melancholic thoughts swirling within her mind, the constant, low-level awareness of the invisible fading that accompanied her like a quiet shadow. She explored her internal struggle to find meaning in this quiet wandering, questioning whether she was seeking a sign, a confirmation of her unique burden, or simply a way to occupy her time under the immense weight of her knowledge, finding that the journey itself became a quiet metaphor for her larger search for purpose in a world where the old, reliable sources of meaning had irrevocably disappeared, leaving a void she could not fill. Focusing on a specific moment of quiet observation, perhaps watching a sunset paint the sky over empty plains or the first hesitant stars, emerge in a sky that felt vast and indifferent to the small human figure below. She described how the profound beauty of the natural world was now tinged with sorrow for the lost layer of divine presence, a beauty that felt both breathtaking and strangely diminished, like a masterpiece viewed through a veil of tears. She encountered other humans on her journey or in the quiet places she visited, farmers tending their fields with stoic determination, merchants traveling dusty roads with their minds on profit, families gathered in small villages, sharing simple meals and local gossip, and she observed their lives, which were entirely centered on immediate human concerns: the planting and the harvest, the buying and the selling, the forging and the breaking of relationships, local troubles, and small joys. She described the brief interactions she had with them. If any, polite greetings exchanged on a dusty road, simple exchanges about the weather or the condition of the path ahead, highlighting the profound disconnect between her inner world, filled with the quiet weight of cosmic fading, and their reality, which was so firmly grounded and immediate, seemingly untouched by the larger, silent drama she perceived unfolding around them, a chasm of awareness that separated her from her own kind. She detailed her pervasive feeling of isolation, the burden of her unique perspective, the quiet, persistent pain of knowing something so fundamental had changed while others remained blissfully unaware or comfortably indifferent, illustrating the paradox of sharing a world with people whose experience of it was fundamentally different from her own, a loneliness that settled deep in her bones, a quiet ache that was hers alone. She explored the various ways people reacted to hints of the old ways or stories, some dismissing them with a wave of the hand as mere superstition or quaint old wives' tales, others holding on to them as comforting traditions or interesting history. But none seemed to feel the living, breathing absence that Elara did, the palpable void where presence once resided, emphasizing the profound loneliness of being the last witness, a silent guardian of a forgotten truth. Focusing on a specific scene of human interaction, perhaps watching children play simple games in the lengthening shadow of an old, forgotten monument, or listening to adults earnestly discuss local politics near a place of former divine significance. She described how these moments quietly underscored the quiet triumph of ordinary human life in the face of cosmic indifference, and Elara's own gentle melancholy at being unable to fully participate in that simpler reality, forever marked by her unique, heavy awareness. She grappled constantly with her internal conflict, the part of her soul that yearned desperately to shed the burden of being the last witness, to simply forget the fading gods and live a normal, uncomplicated human life, unburdened by cosmic sorrow, and the other part, the deeper, perhaps more stubborn part, that felt an inexplicable, profound responsibility to remember, to hold on to the knowledge, however painful, however isolating, a quiet duty she could not explain. She described the moments of quiet rebellion against her burden, the fleeting desires to ignore the subtle signs of fading she perceived everywhere, to convince herself that it was just her imagination, a trick of the light, a product of her own melancholic nature, highlighting her quiet dissatisfaction with her own inability to simply let go and find peace in the comfortable oblivion of ignorance that seemed to embrace everyone else. She detailed the paradoxical nature of her connection to the fading gods, acknowledging that it was undoubtedly a source of profound sorrow and deep isolation, setting her apart from her fellow humans. Yet it also felt, strangely, like the most significant part of her existence, the thing that set her apart and gave her a unique, albeit heavy, purpose in a world that otherwise felt increasingly meaningless, a strange anchor in a drifting reality. She explored the quiet frustration Elara felt towards herself, for being unable to reconcile these conflicting desires, for being caught perpetually between the human world she physically inhabited and the vanishing world she alone perceived. a world of fading divine presences, illustrating the internal struggle that was the quiet core of her burden, a tension that vibrated silently within her soul, a constant low-level hum. Focusing on a specific internal debate Elara had with herself, perhaps while sitting alone under the vast, indifferent expanse of the stars, or by the quiet flow of a stream that seemed to murmur secrets she could no longer decipher. She would weigh the quiet, potential peace of oblivion against the heavy, undeniable weight of remembrance, and she described how this internal battle was not dramatic or loud, but a gentle, persistent ache, a core tension that defined her quiet life, the price of her unique awareness, a gentle sorrow that would likely remain with her until her own quiet fading, a reminder of the world that was, and the burden of having been the one left behind to remember its quiet departure, a gentle sorrow that was hers alone to bear in the silence of the world. Elara often found solace in the quiet corners of her mind, where memories of the gods still resided, choosing to revisit a specific myth that had always resonated deeply within her soul, a tale of the sky god Zephyr and his promise to the first humans, ensuring the winds would always carry their prayers, and the scent of their earthly offerings upwards towards the celestial realm, a story she recounted to herself with the same reverence she had felt since childhood, meticulously detailing the vibrant imagery and the profound connection it depicted, a connection that now felt impossibly distant, yet achingly real in her memory. She described Zephyr not as a remote deity, but as a benevolent presence whose breath shaped the clouds and whispered through the leaves, a god who leaned down from the heavens to hear the hopes and fears of mortals, a relationship built on trust and mutual respect, a world where the divine was not abstract, but a palpable force in the daily lives of people, a stark contrast to the quiet emptiness that had settled over the world like a shroud, a world where the winds still blew, but carried only the scent of rain and earth, devoid of the sacred connection they once held. Yet, telling or even just remembering this cherished story now felt profoundly different. The words themselves remained unchanged, the sequence of events recounted with perfect accuracy, but the underlying resonance, the vibrant life force that had once pulsed within the narrative, was undeniably gone, much like singing a familiar song whose melody is remembered with perfect clarity, but whose accompanying instruments, the rich harmonies and rhythms that gave it depth and emotion, have fallen silent, illustrating the deep, quiet melancholy of stories that have lost their power and relevance in a changed world. It was as though the myth, once a living testament to a dynamic relationship between humanity and the divine, had become a beautiful, intricate shell, its form intact, but its spirit departed, a quiet echo in the vast, silent halls of memory, leaving Elara with a sense of gentle disorientation, a feeling that she was reciting lines from a play whose stage had been dismantled and whose actors had vanished, highlighting the sorrow of narratives that no longer reflect the living reality of the world, becoming mere historical curiosities rather than sources of present truth or comfort. She would detail the specific parts of the myth that now seemed most poignant, almost unbearably sad in the current context of divine absence, dwelling on Zephyr's promise to always hear the prayers of humanity, a vow that could clearly no longer be fulfilled in a world where his presence was a faint, fading memory, or recounting the description of a divine intervention, a moment of God-driven change in the world's order that now seemed utterly impossible, a relic of a time when the cosmic gears still turned under divine hands, or painting the picture of the intimate, reciprocal relationship between God and human that the myth depicted, a bond that now served only to highlight the current chasm, the vast, silent distance that had opened between the mortal and the divine realms. These specific moments within the myth became sharp, quiet points of sorrow for Elara, reminders of a world that was once vibrant with divine interaction, a world where such promises were anchors and such interventions were possibilities, contrasting painfully with the muted reality she inhabited, a reality where humanity was left to navigate its existence without the guidance or comfort of its former celestial companions. emphasizing the depth of the loss, not just of power, but of connection, of a shared cosmic existence that had simply, quietly ceased to be, leaving behind only the ghost of memory and the ache of absence. She explored how the myth, which had once served as a source of profound comfort, offering guidance through uncertainty or filling her with awe at the sheer power of the divine, now served a different, far more somber purpose, acting as a quiet, persistent reminder of what had been irrevocably lost, a window into a world that no longer existed except in the fragile realm of memory, leaving Elara with a sense of profound, gentle sorrow, a quiet grief not just for the departed beings, but for the narrative void they had left behind, the silence where their stories and their presence once resonated. It was like looking at an old, faded map of a country that had sunk beneath the waves, the map still showing the contours of the land, the location of rivers and mountains, but offering no real help in navigating the current reality of the empty sea, the myth providing a detailed picture of a world that was, but offering no solace or guidance in the world that is, a world stripped of its sacred geography, leaving Elara to wander through a landscape that felt both familiar and utterly alien, burdened by the knowledge of its former, richer form, a knowledge that brought only the quiet weight of loss. Elara would often focus on a specific character or a singular event within the chosen myth, perhaps the story of a human who had a direct encounter with Zephyr, or a moment when the god's breath literally changed the course of a river, and describe how she reflected on its meaning in the present day, trying to glean some enduring truth or lesson from it, only to realize, with a quiet, sinking heart, that the lessons or truths it contained, the very meaning and purpose of the event, were inextricably tied to the god's active presence in the world. Without their hand guiding events, without their ears listening to prayers, the story, however beautiful and intricately detailed, became a beautiful, sad relic, a testament to a faded reality, a quiet monument to a world that had moved on, leaving its former narratives behind like discarded garments, a gentle melancholy woven into the very fabric of the past, a past that Elara alone seemed compelled to remember in its entirety, feeling the quiet weight of its beauty and its sorrow, a burden she carried in the silent present. Her reflection on the character's encounter became a meditation on the nature of human connection to the divine, a connection that was once vibrant and reciprocal, but was now severed, leaving humanity adrift, their prayers unheard, their offerings unnoticed, their world devoid of the subtle, constant presence that had once shaped their lives and given meaning to their struggles, a realization that added another layer to the quiet sorrow that accompanied her every thought about the fading gods, a sorrow that was not sharp or dramatic, but a pervasive, gentle ache. She understood, with a quiet clarity that brought its own form of pain, that the myth was not just a story about gods and humans interacting, but a description of the very structure of reality, as it once was, a reality where the divine was an active participant, a force that influenced the winds, the rivers, the fortunes of people. And without that force, the structure had fundamentally changed, leaving the old stories as echoes in an empty chamber, their power gone, their relevance diminished, becoming whispers of a different age, a quiet testament to a world that had quietly, profoundly ceased to be the same. This understanding settled over her like a fine dust, a quiet accumulation of sorrow, as she realized the myths she cherished were not timeless truths, but temporal narratives tied to a specific epoch of divine presence, and their fading was a mirror of the gods' own withdrawal, leaving humanity not just without gods, but without the very stories that had once defined their place in the cosmos. A quiet, pervasive loss that resonated in the silent spaces of her soul, a gentle melancholy that was the constant companion of her unique awareness. She would trace the lines of the story in her mind, picturing Zephyr's form, the humans lifting their faces to the sky, the wind carrying their pleas, and each detail, once a source of warmth and connection, now felt like a small, quiet wound, a reminder of what had been lost, the vibrant tapestry of the past now seen through the lens of present absence, its colors muted, its threads loosened, a fragile relic held only within the confines of her own memory, a memory that felt increasingly like a lonely museum dedicated to a vanished world, a world whose stories she was the last human curator of. Even the moments of awe and wonder depicted in the myth, the sheer power of Zephyr's breath shaping the world, now carried a tinge of sadness, a quiet contemplation of how such power could simply withdraw, leaving behind only the stories of its former might, stories that no longer inspired awe at a present force, but a gentle, sorrowful nostalgia for a past reality, a reality where the divine was not a subject of folklore, but a living, breathing presence, a presence whose absence now defined the quiet landscape of Elara's world and the quiet burden of her soul. She saw the myth as a kind of anchor that had been lifted, leaving the ship of humanity adrift on a silent sea, the stars above still present, but no longer guided by divine hands, the winds still blowing, but carrying no sacred messages, the earth still turning, but devoid of the subtle, constant presence of its creators. A quiet, profound shift that the old stories now highlighted with a painful clarity, becoming not guides, but memorials, silent monuments to a connection that had simply, quietly dissolved into the ether, leaving behind only the echo of its former existence and the quiet weight of its loss. Elara reflected on the human characters in the myth, their simple faith, their direct interaction with the divine, and felt a quiet ache of longing for that simpler time, a time when the relationship was clear, the lines of communication open, even if the gods were sometimes capricious or demanding. That direct connection felt infinitely preferable to the current silence, the vast, empty expanse that now separated humanity from the celestial realm. A separation that the myth now underscored with every recounted detail, every remembered interaction, highlighting the quiet tragedy of a bond that had simply quietly faded away, leaving behind only the stories of its former strength, stories that now felt like whispers from another world, a world that existed only in the fragile space of memory, a memory that Elara alone seemed to carry with the full weight of its reality and its sorrow. She realized that the deep, quiet sorrow she felt was not just for the absence of the gods themselves, but for the loss of the world they had shaped, the world where myths were not just stories but maps, where belief was not just faith but a lived reality, where the human and the divine were intertwined in a complex, vibrant dance, a dance that had now ended. Leaving humanity to stand alone on a silent stage, the music stopped, the partners gone, the story finished, except for the quiet, persistent echo that resonated within Elara, the last human witness to the quiet departure, the last keeper of the stories that now serve only as gentle, melancholic reminders of a faded reality. So she held on to the myths, not as sources of hope or guidance, but as fragile artifacts, pieces of a shattered world she alone remembered in its entirety, recounting them to herself in the quiet moments of her day, tracing the lines of the narrative, feeling the weight of the words that once held power, but now held only sorrow, a sorrow that was not a dramatic cry, but a quiet, pervasive hum beneath the surface of her existence, a gentle melancholy woven into the fabric of her being, a testament to the world that was, and the burden of having been the one left behind to remember its quiet departure, a gentle sorrow that was hers alone to bear in the silence of the world, a silence now filled only by the quiet echo of forgotten stories and the gentle weight of her own awareness, the quiet burden of being the last human witness to the fading of ancient gods. Ehen to remember its quiet departure, a gentle sorrow that was hers alone to bear in the silence of the world, a silence now filled only by the quiet echo of forgotten stories and the gentle weight of her own awareness, the quiet burden of being the last human witness to the fading of ancient gods. A pervasive sense of weariness began to settle over Elara, a deep-seated fatigue that was not the result of any sudden, dramatic collapse, but rather the slow, accumulative toll of her quiet journey, the constant, unyielding awareness she carried, and the persistent internal struggle that had become an inseparable part of her existence. A quiet exhaustion that had settled deep within her bones, a heavy, persistent guest. She felt how the burden of being the last witness to the fading divine presence felt heavier now, not necessarily in a way that was more acutely painful than before, but rather more cumbersome, like carrying a physical weight that had slowly and subtly become simply a part of her own physical being. A constant, low-level drain on her energy and on her spirit that was always present, never truly lifting. There was a quiet paradox in her continued persistence, for despite the profound weariness that clung to her like a second skin, the lack of any clear, guiding purpose to her wandering, and the overwhelming, quiet sense of loss that permeated her days, Elara continued to move forward, to live her quiet, solitary life, driven by a subtle inertia or a deep, ingrained sense of responsibility she found herself utterly unable to fully articulate. A gentle, directionless movement that simply continued. She found herself exploring moments of quiet contemplation where she would question the very point of it all, asking herself why she bothered remembering, why she continued witnessing, what the purpose was of carrying this heavy, invisible burden, and how these quiet questions never seemed to lead to any concrete answers, but simply served to underscore the quiet futility that sometimes crept into her thoughts, a gentle melancholy that seemed to accompany her every step. Elara noticed how this deep weariness manifested in specific physical actions, perhaps in the way she found herself walking just a little slower than she once did, or in her increased need to rest more often throughout the day, or in how even simple, previously effortless tasks now seemed to demand more of her energy than they should, and she would interweave this tangible physical state with her pervasive mental and emotional fatigue, illustrating clearly how the burden of the fading gods had not remained merely an abstract concept, but had seeped into her very physical presence, becoming a quiet, undeniable manifestation of her soul's profound exhaustion. The constant, quiet awareness of the fading presence of the ancient gods was a subtle current beneath every moment of Elara's life, a low hum that resonated in her bones and echoed in the silence of the world around her, a persistent reminder of the vast, invisible shift that had occurred and was perhaps still occurring, a transformation that most of humanity seemed entirely oblivious to, caught up in the immediate, tangible concerns of their everyday lives. This awareness was a form of solitude in itself, a knowledge that separated her from the easy camaraderie and shared realities of others, leaving her with a unique perspective that was both a privilege and a profound burden, a quiet weight that shaped her interactions, her thoughts, and her very perception of the world, making her an observer of a cosmic transition that only she seemed to fully grasp. The internal struggle between the desire for release from this burden and the inexplicable sense of duty to remember was a quiet, ongoing battle within Elara, a conflict that did not manifest in outward turmoil, but in a persistent, gentle ache in her chest, a quiet tension that was always present, a quiet counterpoint to the world's increasing indifference. She would sometimes try to articulate the feeling, a sense of something vast and sacred slipping away to the few people she encountered, but the words would feel inadequate, foreign even to her own ears, met with polite smiles or blank stares that only served to deepen her sense of isolation, reinforcing her solitary role as the last human witness to this silent, grand departure. The landscape she moved through, once potentially alive with the echoes of divine power or the resonance of ancient myths, now felt muted, quieter, beautiful in their own right, but stripped of a layer of transcendent meaning that only her memory and her unique awareness could still perceive. A quiet sorrow accompanying the beauty of the rolling hills and silent forests. Even the remnants of places significantly touched by the fading gods, the crumbling ruins of temples, or the oddly shaped natural formations associated with old myths, felt like museums of absence to Elara, filled with a sense of past significance that was slowly eroding, like sand castles returning to the tide, evoking a bittersweet feeling of connection to something vast that was irrevocably slipping away. The physical state of these remnants, stones worn smooth by rain and wind, carvings obscured by moss, altars serving as resting places for birds, emphasized their integration back into the natural world, highlighting the finality of the gods' departure and the world's quiet indifference to their absence, stirring a mix of quiet reverence and sorrow within Elara. She felt a sense of being one of the last guardians of their memory, even as the physical structures themselves crumbled, feeling the weight of history and the burden of being one of the few who still perceived its loss, finding a strange, quiet solace in these places of palpable absence. A specific artifact within these ruins, perhaps a broken statue or a faded inscription, would speak to Elara not of power or glory, but of vulnerability and transience, mirroring her own human fragility in the face of such immense, quiet loss. A gentle reminder that even the divine could fade, leaving behind only echoes and the quiet burden of remembrance. Her encounters with other humans on her journey, their lives entirely centered on mundane concerns like crops, trade, relationships, and local troubles, highlighted the profound disconnect between her inner world and their reality, which was grounded and immediate, untouched by the larger, silent drama she perceived, deepening her feeling of isolation. The brief greetings and simple exchanges she had with farmers, merchants, or families underscored the quiet pain of knowing something so fundamental had changed, while others remained unaware or indifferent, illustrating the paradox of sharing a world with people whose experience of it was fundamentally different from her own, a quiet, unbridgeable chasm. The various ways people reacted to hints of the old ways or stories, some dismissing them as superstition, others holding on to them as quaint traditions, but none seeming to feel the living, breathing absence that Elara did, emphasized the profound loneliness of being the last witness, the solitary keeper of a truth that had become irrelevant to the world. A specific scene of human interaction, perhaps watching children play in the shadow of an old, forgotten monument or listening to adults discuss local politics near a place of former divine significance, underscored the quiet triumph of ordinary human life in the face of cosmic indifference, and Elara's own gentle melancholy at being unable to fully participate in that simpler, unburdened reality. Grappling with her internal conflict, the part of her that yearned to shed the burden of being the last witness, to forget the fading gods and simply live a normal human life, was in constant quiet tension with the part that felt an inexplicable, ingrained responsibility to remember, to hold on to the knowledge, however painful and isolating it might be, a quiet battle within her soul. She experienced moments of quiet rebellion against her burden, fleeting desires to ignore the subtle signs of fading, to convince herself it was just her imagination or a trick of the light, highlighting her quiet dissatisfaction with her own inability to simply let go and find peace in the comfortable ignorance that most others seemed to possess. The paradoxical nature of her connection to the fading gods was a source of profound sorrow and isolation, yet it also felt like the most significant, defining part of her existence, the thing that set her apart and gave her a unique, albeit heavy, purpose in a world that otherwise felt increasingly meaningless and adrift without its celestial anchors. Elara felt a quiet frustration towards herself for being unable to reconcile these conflicting desires, for being caught perpetually between the human world she inhabited with its tangible concerns and the vanishing world she perceived with its subtle, profound losses, illustrating the quiet, internal struggle that was the enduring core of her burden, a persistent, gentle ache. A specific internal debate she had with herself, perhaps while sitting alone under the vast, silent stars or by a quiet stream whose water seemed indifferent to the cosmic shift, involved weighing the quiet peace of oblivion against the heavy, demanding weight of remembrance. And she would describe how this internal battle was not a dramatic clash, but a gentle, persistent ache, a core tension that defined her quiet, solitary life. Finding a place of deep solitude, perhaps a high, windswept ridge where the sky felt vast and empty, or a secluded cave where the silence was absolute, allowed Elara to enter a period of intense, quiet introspection, contemplating the very nature of belief itself, the fragility of memory, and the deep, perhaps fundamental, human need for something beyond themselves, something transcendent to anchor their existence. The vastness of the sky above her and the profound silence of the earth around her seemed to mirror the existential questions that filled her mind in these moments of solitude. Questions like what truly remains when the anchors of the divine are gone, and what it fundamentally means to be human in a world that feels increasingly empty of transcendent meaning, a world stripped bare of its sacred layers. Her reflections often turn to the process of forgetting, both on a personal level, the way memories lose their sharpness over time, and on a collective level, how the fading of the gods seemed to be mirrored by humanity's own gradual amnesia, a quiet, collective shedding of the sacred that left behind a growing void, a feeling of being adrift without a celestial compass to guide their way through existence. She explored the concept of the existential burden, the inherent weight of consciousness itself in a seemingly indifferent universe, a burden that was amplified for Elara by her unique, isolating awareness of the divine withdrawal, and how this burden was not a sudden, acute crisis, but a slow, pervasive pressure, a constant, quiet companion in her solitude, never truly lifting. A specific philosophical question often occupied Elara's thoughts during these times of quiet reflection, perhaps one related to the fundamental nature of reality, the ultimate purpose of human existence in a godless world, or the quiet tragedy of beings who create meaning only to watch it slowly fade away. And she would describe how these ponderings were not academic exercises, but deeply felt anxieties that resonated with the quiet sorrow of her soul, a profound, gentle melancholy. She would recount a specific myth or legend from the time when the gods were undeniably present, choosing one that vividly illustrated their power, their deep connection to humanity, or their crucial role in maintaining the world's order, detailing the story with the quiet reverence she still held for it, a precious relic in her memory. She noticed how telling, or even just remembering this story, now felt profoundly different than it once did. The words were precisely the same, the events were recounted accurately, but the underlying resonance, the sense of living power and present truth, was gone. Like singing a song whose melody was perfectly remembered, but whose accompanying instruments had fallen silent, illustrating the quiet melancholy of stories losing their vital, sacred power. She would detail the parts of the myth that seemed most poignant in the current, godless context, perhaps a promise made by a god that could no longer possibly be fulfilled in this changed reality, a description of a divine intervention that now seemed utterly impossible, or a depiction of a relationship between God and human that highlighted the vast, current chasm between the two realms, a quiet ache in the retelling. She explored how the myth, which once served as a source of comfort, guidance, or awe for her ancestors, and perhaps even for herself in her youth, now served primarily as a quiet, painful reminder of what had been irrevocably lost, a window into a world that no longer existed, leaving Elara with a sense of profound, gentle sorrow for the narrative void left behind, the silence where divine voices once echoed. She would focus on a specific character or event within the myth and describe how she would reflect on its meaning in the present day, realizing with a quiet sadness that the lessons or truths it contained were intrinsically tied to the god's presence and active participation in the world. And without them, the story became a beautiful, sad relic, a testament to a faded reality, a gentle melancholy woven deeply into the very fabric of the past, a past that felt increasingly distant. A profound sense of weariness had settled over Elara, not the simple tiredness of a day's labor, but a pervasive fatigue that was the cumulative result of her quiet, aimless journey, the constant, heavy awareness of the invisible fading, and the relentless internal struggle that had become the quiet undercurrent of her existence, a deep exhaustion that had settled into the very marrow of her bones, a constant, quiet companion. She felt how the burden of being the last witness to the departure of the ancient gods felt heavier now than ever before. Not necessarily in a way that brought more acute pain, but in a manner that was undeniably more cumbersome, like carrying a physical weight that had become so integrated into her being. It was simply a part of her physical form, a constant low-level drain on her energy and on her spirit that never truly subsided. There was a quiet paradox in her continued persistence, a subtle defiance of the logic of despair. For despite the profound weariness that seemed to cling to her like a damp cloak, the lack of any clear, guiding purpose to her wandering, and the overwhelming, quiet sense of loss that permeated her days like a fine mist, Elara continued to move forward, to live her quiet, solitary life, driven by a simple inertia or a subtle, ingrained sense of responsibility she found herself utterly unable to fully articulate, a gentle, directionless movement that simply continued on. She found herself increasingly exploring moments of quiet contemplation where she would question the very point of it all, asking herself in the silent spaces between her thoughts what the purpose was of remembering, what the value was of witnessing, what the gain was in carrying this heavy, invisible burden, and how these quiet questions never seemed to lead to any concrete, satisfying answers, but simply served to underscore the quiet futility that sometimes crept into her thoughts like a slow tide, a gentle melancholy that seemed to accompany her every step, every breath. Elara noticed how this deep, soul weariness manifested in specific, tangible physical actions, perhaps in the way she found herself walking just a little slower than she once did, her pace more measured, or in her increased need to rest more often throughout the day, finding quiet spots to simply sit and breathe, or in how even simple, previously effortless tasks now seemed to demand more of her physical and mental energy than they should, requiring a conscious effort she hadn't needed before. And she would interweave this tangible physical state with her pervasive mental and emotional fatigue, illustrating clearly how the burden of the fading gods had not remained merely an abstract concept residing solely in her mind, but had seeped into her very physical presence, becoming a quiet, undeniable manifestation of her soul's profound and persistent exhaustion. The mental and emotional fatigue, illustrating clearly how the burden of the fading gods had not remained merely an abstract concept residing solely in her mind, but had seeped into her very physical presence, becoming a quiet, undeniable manifestation of her soul's profound and persistent exhaustion. Seeking a temporary reprieve from this pervasive weariness, Elara found herself drawn towards a place of quiet solitude, a hidden valley untouched by the indifferent march of human settlement, perhaps a quiet cove nestled by a forgotten shore where the waves whispered ancient secrets to the sand, or a grove of ancient trees whose branches reached towards the sky like silent, weathered guardians, a sanctuary offering a fleeting illusion of peace amidst the ongoing, silent cosmic shift. She settled into this secluded haven, allowing the gentle sounds of nature to wash over her, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant murmur of water flowing over stones. The quality of the light filtering through the canopy felt soft and diffused, painting the earth in dappled patterns, and the scent of damp earth and growing things filled the air, emphasizing the profound tranquility of this space, and how it offered a brief, precious moment where the immense weight of the fading gods felt slightly less oppressive, a gentle, temporary soothing balm for her weary spirit. In this quiet place, Elara simply sat, observing the slow dance of sunlight and shadow, allowing herself the rare luxury of simply existing without the constant internal noise of her unique burden, the quiet hum of vanishing divinity that usually occupied the forefront of her consciousness, and in this stillness, the longing for true, lasting peace. A release from the heavy knowledge she carried, awakened within her with a quiet intensity, a deep, quiet yearning for a freedom she suspected might never truly arrive. Even within the tranquil embrace of this secluded sanctuary, the inescapable knowledge of the fading gods remained, a quiet hum beneath the surface of her consciousness, a low, persistent frequency like a distant bell tolling for a forgotten era, or the inexorable pull of a low tide receding from the shore. subtly illustrating with quiet certainty that the burden she carried was not an external weight that could be simply left behind or forgotten in a place of peace, but was intrinsically woven into the very fabric of her being, an inseparable part of who she had become. She focused on a specific quiet activity here, perhaps watching the fluffy white clouds drift lazily across the vast expanse of the sky above her, their shapes shifting and reforming in slow, unhurried patterns, or listening intently to the wind as it sighed and whispered through the leaves of the ancient trees surrounding her, and described how these simple, peaceful acts of observation were undeniably tinged with the ever-present awareness of the larger, silent changes unfolding in the world, the quiet departure of the divine, making even these moments of profound peace feel bittersweet, a gentle, melancholic reminder of the ongoing, irreversible loss she alone seemed to witness. Observing a solitary bee buzzing among the wildflowers, Elara noted its focused industry, a small life entirely engrossed in its immediate purpose, collecting pollen and nectar, a stark, quiet contrast to her own existence, which felt increasingly defined by an immense, cosmic sorrow, highlighting the simple beauty of a life unburdened by the knowledge of vanishing gods, a beauty she admired, but could not fully inhabit, feeling forever separated by the weight she carried. The texture of the ancient tree bark beneath her fingertips felt rough and deeply grooved, a testament to centuries of quiet growth and endurance. And as she traced its patterns, she reflected on the concept of time and permanence, how these trees had stood through ages when the gods walked more freely, and how they now stood silent witnesses to their quiet departure, their stoic presence a quiet comfort, and a subtle reminder that some things in the world possessed a resilience she envied, a capacity for quiet persistence. A small stream trickled nearby, its water clear and cool, flowing over smooth stones with a soft, murmuring sound, and Elara watched its ceaseless movement, the water always changing, always moving forward, yet the stream itself remained, a constant presence in the landscape, prompting a quiet contemplation on the nature of change versus continuity, and whether the fading gods represented a true disappearance, or merely a transformation into something she could not yet perceive, a question that lingered without demanding an answer, simply adding another layer to her quiet burden. The air in this secluded spot felt different, lighter perhaps, yet also charged with a subtle, almost imperceptible resonance, a faint echo of the divine presence that had once been strong here, a whisper on the edge of hearing, and Elara breathed it in slowly, allowing the feeling to settle within her, acknowledging this lingering trace, not with hope for return, but with a quiet, gentle reverence for what had been, a silent farewell carried on the wind. She noticed how the shadows lengthened as the sun began its slow descent, painting the valley in deeper hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, quiet spectacle, and this natural transition from day to night mirrored, in a gentle, unspoken way, the larger transition she was witnessing in the world, the fading of a light, a presence, leaving behind a deepening quiet, a growing darkness where the sacred had once shone brightly, a parallel that resonated deeply within her melancholic heart. The feeling of the soft grass beneath her body was grounding, connecting her to the earth itself, this ancient planet that had hosted both the vibrant life of humanity and the powerful presence of the gods, and she felt a quiet kinship with the soil, the stones, the trees, silent inhabitants of a world that was quietly, profoundly changing, sharing a quiet existence under a sky that felt increasingly vast and empty of its former divine inhabitants, a shared experience of quiet persistence. Allowing her gaze to soften, Elara looked out over the valley, seeing the distant, hazy outline of human settlements on the horizon, reminders of the world she inhabited, but felt increasingly estranged from, their bustling lives and concerns seeming so small and immediate compared to the silent, cosmic drama she perceived, and she felt a quiet ache of separation, a gentle sorrow for the connection she lacked with her own kind, burdened by a truth they could not see. The temporary respite offered by this secluded place was a fragile gift, A brief pause in the constant awareness of her burden, like a single calm breath taken in a storm. And she cherished these moments of stillness, knowing they were fleeting, that the weight would return with her when she left. But grateful for the quiet interlude, this gentle reminder of what peace might feel like, a quiet yearning for its permanence. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening only to the symphony of quiet natural sounds around her, the chirping of unseen insects, the rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth, the distant call of a bird, allowing these simple, organic noises to fill the space usually occupied by the quiet hum of the fading gods. A conscious effort to ground herself in the present, in the tangible reality of the natural world, however temporary the distraction. When she opened her eyes, the light had shifted further, the shadows deeper, and the quiet awareness of her burden returned, not with a sudden shock, but like the slow, inevitable return of the tide, a gentle, persistent pressure settling back into her consciousness, reminding her that this place of solitude was not an escape, but merely a pause, a brief, quiet interlude in the long, slow journey of being the last human witness. A truth she accepted with a quiet sigh, the melancholy, a constant companion. The memory of the vibrant world where gods were present felt distant now, like a dream recalled upon waking, its edges blurred, its colors muted, and comparing it to the quiet reality around her in this peaceful valley underscored the profound depth of the loss. Not a dramatic emptiness, but a subtle, pervasive quietness. A world that felt subtly diminished, stripped of a layer of magic and meaning that only she seemed to mourn with quiet, persistent sorrow. Sitting there, surrounded by the quiet beauty of nature, Elara understood that her burden was not a task to be completed or a problem to be solved, but a state of being, a quiet awareness woven into the fabric of her soul. And places like this valley offered not a cure, but a gentle, temporary management of the ache, a quiet space to simply be with the weight, to acknowledge it without being overwhelmed, finding a quiet strength in the simple act of enduring. The quiet passage of time in this secluded spot felt different, slower, more deliberate, each moment stretching out like a long, calm breath, allowing her mind to quieten, the frantic edges of thought smoothing out, replaced by a gentle, contemplative stillness, a state that was both peaceful and tinged with the quiet melancholy of knowing that even time itself was a witness to the world's subtle, ongoing transformation, the quiet fading of the divine, woven into its very passage. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in soft, muted colors, Elara prepared to leave this place of temporary respite, carrying the quiet peace she had found within her, knowing it would mingle with the ever-present weight of her burden, a complex tapestry of feeling that defined her unique existence, the last human witness to a world that was quietly, irrevocably changing, leaving her with a gentle sorrow and the quiet strength to continue her solitary path. In her, knowing it would mingle with the ever-present weight of her burden, a complex tapestry of feeling that defined her unique existence, the last human witness to a world that was quietly, irrevocably changing, leaving her with a gentle sorrow and the quiet strength to continue her solitary path. Elara began to reflect deeply upon the very nature of fading itself, noticing how this quiet process was not confined solely to the grand, almost imperceptible departure of the ancient gods from the world. She observed that fading was a pervasive force, a gentle, undeniable current flowing through all aspects of existence, manifesting not only in the cosmic, but also in the slow, quiet disappearance of countless other things that once seemed permanent or vibrant within her own human experience. She saw it in the way cherished memories lost their initial sharpness over the passage of time, becoming softer, less detailed echoes of past events, like well-worn stones smoothed by ceaseless currents. This fading was present in the gradual drifting apart of relationships, where bonds that once felt unbreakable slowly loosened, becoming faint connections across widening distances, a quiet dissolution that mirrored the gods' withdrawal. She witnessed it in the predictable, yet somehow still poignant transformation of the seasons, each one fading into the next with a quiet inevitability, a constant cycle of growth, peak, decline, and quiet departure. And perhaps most profoundly, she recognized this fading in the slow, inexorable movement of life itself towards its quiet, final end, seeing the arc of human existence as a form of gentle, pervasive fading from vibrant beginning to peaceful conclusion. She understood that witnessing the grand, cosmic fading of the divine realm had fundamentally altered her perception, attuning her senses and her soul to the smaller, more intimate, and deeply personal forms of fading that occurred constantly in her own quiet life and in the ordinary world around her. This unique, heavy awareness had created a new lens through which she viewed the entirety of existence, a perspective subtly but profoundly tinged with a gentle, persistent melancholy, yet also imbued with a quiet, almost resigned understanding of the fundamental transience that seemed to be the world's true, underlying nature. She saw the beauty in moments, the vibrancy in connections, the solidity in things, but always with the quiet, underlying knowledge that all of it, eventually, was subject to this same gentle, pervasive process of fading, a truth that brought both sorrow and a strange, quiet peace. She spent long hours in quiet contemplation of memory itself, pondering its paradoxical nature, how it served as the primary vessel for preserving the past, holding on to moments and presences that were otherwise gone forever from the tangible world. Yet she also understood how memory inherently altered what it preserved, subtly shifting details, coloring emotions, and reshaping narratives with each recall, making the past both accessible and perpetually, gently unreliable, a fluid, ever-changing landscape within the mind. Memory could be a profound source of comfort, allowing her to revisit moments of joy, connection, or the vibrant, awe-inspiring presence of the gods as they once were, offering solace in their remembered light, even in the face of their current absence. However, it was also a source of quiet, persistent pain, especially when she remembered something that no longer truly existed in the same form, like the once vibrant, powerful presence of the gods, their remembered glory highlighting the stark, quiet reality of their current state of near-total absence. This contemplation illustrated the deeply paradoxical nature of human memory in a world defined by change and loss, a world where the past was both held close and perpetually, gently slipping away, leaving behind echoes that were both real and unreal. She explored the complex idea that fading, in its most fundamental sense, was not necessarily an absolute ending or a final annihilation, but rather a quiet, subtle transformation, a gradual dissolution, or a slow, gentle return to a simpler, perhaps less defined state of being. She grappled with the profound implications of applying this abstract, philosophical idea to the gods themselves, wondering in the quiet solitude of her thoughts what truly remained of them, if anything at all, after centuries of this slow, pervasive withdrawal from the human realm and the world they once shaped. She questioned what persisted of their divine essence, their power, their consciousness, or if their fading was a complete disintegration, a return to the fundamental dust or energy from which they might have emerged in the mists of time, a thought both unsettling and strangely calming in its finality. And she pondered, with a quiet ache at her heart, what remained of the deep, intricate human connection to them, the rituals, the beliefs, the shared sense of a cosmic order, wondering if that too had simply faded into the quiet background noise of human history, leaving an unacknowledged void. Her thoughts often settled upon a specific image or a potent metaphor for fading that resonated most deeply with the quiet, pervasive sense of loss that defined her unique human experience as the last witness. Perhaps it was the slow, relentless erosion of hard stone by the persistent, gentle flow of water, a process that took centuries to shape landscapes, but was utterly undeniable in its quiet, constant work of wearing away substance over time, a perfect image of the god's subtle departure. Or maybe it was the gradual, almost imperceptible dimming of light at dusk, The way the vibrant colors of sunset softened and deepened, then slowly surrendered to the quiet, monochrome arrival of night, a beautiful but melancholic transition mirroring the world's loss of divine radiance. Another potent image was the quiet disappearance of footprints left upon the sand, each step a temporary mark on the world's surface, slowly erased by the gentle whisper of the wind or the soft, insistent touch of the incoming tide, leaving no trace of what had been there just moments before. She found that each of these images, in their own quiet way, encapsulated the gentle, pervasive, and undeniable sense of loss that had become the defining characteristic of her solitary existence, a constant, low-level hum beneath the surface of her quiet life. This chosen image for fading served as a quiet, ever-present symbol in her mind, a visual representation of the profound, gentle sorrow that accompanied her unique burden, reminding her daily of the world's quiet transformation and her solitary place within it. It was a melancholic symbol, yes, but also one that brought a strange sense of clarity and acceptance, a quiet acknowledgement that fading was simply a part of the universal process, a truth that applied to gods and humans alike, weaving them together in the grand, quiet tapestry of transient existence. Her contemplation of these images brought no dramatic revelation, no sudden lifting of her burden, but rather a deeper, quieter understanding, a gentle settling into the reality of a world where even the divine could fade, leaving behind only echoes in the quiet, persistent memory held by the last human witness. This understanding of fading as a universal force, a quiet transformation rather than a sudden end, allowed her to view her own life and the lives of those around her with a new kind of gentle empathy, seeing the quiet strength in simply existing within this ever-changing, ever-fading reality. She carried these reflections with her as she continued her quiet journey, the images of eroding stone, dimming light, and vanishing footprints woven into the fabric of her thoughts, a constant, gentle reminder of the transient beauty and quiet sorrow of the world she inhabited. Her burden remained, but it was now tinged with this broadened perspective, a quiet awareness that the fading she witnessed on a grand scale was merely a reflection of the subtle, constant fading occurring all around her, in every memory, every relationship, every fleeting moment of human existence. This new lens, though melancholic, allowed her to appreciate the present with a quiet intensity, understanding its fleeting nature, finding a gentle beauty in the moments before they too began their inevitable, quiet journey into the realm of memory and eventual fading. She felt a quiet connection to the world through this shared experience of transience, seeing herself not just as a witness to the god's departure, but as a participant in the universal dance of fading, a human soul moving gently through a world that was constantly, quietly transforming. This understanding did not erase the sorrow of loss, but it framed it within a larger, quieter context, a cosmic rhythm of appearance and disappearance that encompassed all things, from the grandest deities to the smallest human memory. And so, Elara continued her path, the quiet burden of the last human witness now softened, though not lightened, by her gentle understanding of fading as the world's quiet, pervasive truth, a truth that resonated deep within her own transient human heart. She walked with a quiet grace, observing the world through this new lens, seeing the beauty in its impermanence, finding a gentle peace in the quiet acceptance of things as they were, always moving, always changing, always quietly fading. Her thoughts drifted like leaves on a gentle breeze, touching upon the quiet persistence of memory, the delicate threads of human connection, and the profound, simple act of being present in a world that was both full and empty, vibrant and fading. She knew her journey was not towards a destination that would bring back the past or restore what was lost, but simply a quiet movement through the present, observing, remembering, and understanding the subtle, pervasive truth of fading that defined her existence. This quiet understanding became a form of gentle strength, allowing her to carry the weight of her burden not as a crushing load, but as a quiet companion, a constant reminder of the depth and complexity of the human experience in a world touched by the divine. Even as that touch faded into memory, she felt a quiet kinship with all things transient, with the fleeting beauty of a flower, the passing of a cloud, the gentle ebb and flow of the tides, recognizing the same quiet rhythm of fading in them that she saw in the departure of the gods. This perspective brought a quiet, profound sense of belonging to the natural world, a world that understood fading not as loss, but as transformation, a continuous cycle of becoming and unbecoming, a quiet, eternal dance. Elara found a quiet comfort in this realization, seeing her own burden not as a unique curse, but as a heightened awareness of a universal truth, a truth that connected her to the quiet, persistent flow of existence itself. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the gentle breeze on her skin, hearing the quiet sounds of the natural world, and allowed herself to simply be present in the moment, a quiet observer of a world that was always gently fading. Her heart felt a quiet, melancholic peace, a peace born not of forgetting, but of understanding and acceptance, a gentle surrender to the quiet, inevitable process that shaped all things, divine and human alike. She opened her eyes again, the world before her appearing both familiar and new, seen through the lens of her quiet understanding of fading, a world of transient beauty and gentle sorrow, a world she was destined to witness in its quiet transformation. And as the day began its slow, gentle fade towards evening, Elara continued her quiet journey, carrying her burden with a new kind of gentle strength, a strength born of understanding the quiet, pervasive truth of fading that was woven into the very fabric of existence. She walked with a quiet purpose that was not about reaching a destination, but about the simple act of moving through the world, observing its quiet changes, feeling the gentle rhythm of fading in her own steps and in the world around her. Her thoughts were like quiet waves, washing over the shores of memory and perception, each one bringing a new layer of understanding to the complex, gentle process of fading that defined her unique human experience. She knew that the burden of being the last witness would never fully leave her, but she also knew that she could carry it with a quiet grace, finding beauty and meaning in the very process of loss and transformation. Elara felt a quiet sense of connection to the ancient gods, not through their presence, which had faded, but through the shared experience of transience. A quiet bond formed in the acceptance of fading as a universal truth. This quiet bond was not one of power or reverence, but of quiet understanding and gentle melancholy, a shared acknowledgement of the impermanence that touched all beings, divine and human alike. She found a quiet strength in this connection, a strength that allowed her to face the emptiness left by the gods' departure, not with despair, but with a quiet, contemplative acceptance of the world as it was now. Her quiet journey continued, each step a gentle movement through a world that was constantly, subtly changing, a world whose true nature was revealed to her through the lens of her burden. She saw the quiet beauty in the world's impermanence, in the way things appeared and disappeared, in the gentle rhythm of life and fading that played out all around her, a constant, quiet symphony. Elara's heart was full of a quiet, gentle sorrow, but also a quiet, gentle peace, a complex tapestry of feeling that was the hallmark of her unique existence as the last human witness. She understood that her story was not just about the gods who faded, but about the human soul who remained to witness their quiet departure, a story of resilience, introspection, and the quiet strength found in the face of profound, gentle loss. And so, Elara continued, a quiet figure moving through a world that was constantly, gently, and irrevocably fading, carrying her burden with a quiet grace and a deep, gentle understanding of the transient nature of all things. Shin, and the quiet strength found in the face of profound, gentle loss. And so, Elara continued, a quiet figure moving through a world that was constantly, gently, and irrevocably fading, carrying her burden with a quiet grace and a deep, gentle understanding of the transient nature of all things. Elara felt the ground shift subtly beneath her feet as she approached what felt like a significant landmark, not a place marked by bustling activity or grand celebration, but rather a solitary high point overlooking a vast, seemingly empty landscape that stretched out endlessly before her, a place where her slow, meandering journey seemed to have finally arrived at its quiet, destined conclusion. She had walked for many days, the path unfolding beneath her like a worn ribbon, and now she stood on this rise, the wind whispering secrets she couldn't quite decipher, a feeling settling upon her that this was not a destination of dramatic climax or sudden revelation, but simply the place where her quiet wandering was meant to cease, a point of stillness in the long, gentle arc of her life. Describing the feeling of arrival at this place was difficult, for it wasn't a sense of accomplishment that filled her. No triumphant surge of energy or satisfying completion, but a profound, quiet stillness that settled deep within her bones. A feeling that she had simply arrived where she was meant to be all along. A place where the pervasive fading she had witnessed across the land felt most palpable, most present in its profound, aching absence. It was as if the air itself held the memory of something vast that had departed, a silent testament to the withdrawal of the ancient gods. And standing there, Elara felt the full weight of her long journey culminating in this moment of quiet arrival, a gentle confrontation with the quiet end of an era, both cosmic in its scale and deeply personal in its quiet, solitary impact upon her soul. Her experience of simply being in this location was one of quiet observation, standing on the high point and observing the world from this unique vantage point, feeling the culmination of her slow, quiet journey wash over her like a gentle tide, and sensing the full, heavy weight of her long-held burden settling upon her shoulders with a quiet finality, a gentle confrontation with the quiet end of an era that had defined so much of her existence, an ending that was both cosmic and profoundly personal. From this elevated position, the vastness of the landscape below seemed to underscore the immensity of the loss she carried, the empty plains and silent forests stretching towards a horizon that held no promise of divine return. And in this stillness, she felt the quiet resonance of her own journey, finding its temporary rest, a moment of gentle acceptance in the face of an ending that was not dramatic, but simply quiet and complete. The absence in this place was perhaps its most defining characteristic, a pervasive silence where the echoes of divine resonance should have lingered, a profound emptiness in the vast sky above where the presence of gods was once felt, and how this very absence spoke volumes to Elara, confirming in the most undeniable way the full extent of the loss she had witnessed across the world, solidifying her unique, solitary understanding of the quiet departure. There were no whispers on the wind that carried divine secrets, no subtle shifts in the light that hinted at unseen power, only the vast, indifferent silence of a world stripped bare of its celestial inhabitants. And in this emptiness, Elara found a quiet, melancholic confirmation of her burden, a solitary knowledge shared with no one else, a profound understanding of the quiet void left behind, focusing on a specific sensory detail of the location. Elara felt the persistent, quiet touch of the wind on her skin, a constant, gentle presence that moved across the high point, carrying with it the scent of distant earth and ancient stone. And she observed the quality of the light as the day slowly began to end, casting long, melancholic shadows across the empty landscape below, painting the world in hues of quiet sorrow. This interaction between the external sensory details of the place and Elara's internal state created a moment of quiet, profound melancholy, a gentle acceptance of the world as it was now, stripped bare of its divine inhabitants, a world that was still beautiful in its own quiet way, but forever changed by the silent, irreversible departure, leaving behind a human witness to carry the quiet burden of its memory. Elara settled into the final location, finding a quiet space where the vast, empty expanse above began to show the first faint pinpricks of emerging stars as the last light slowly faded from the sky, a quiet, unhurried conclusion to her long, meandering journey and the silent narrative of her story. Her state of being was not one of dramatic resolution or sudden peace, but a quiet, deep acceptance of the ongoing state of burden and pervasive melancholy, a gentle understanding that the cosmic fading she had witnessed for so long was now essentially complete. Yet the quiet weight of having been the sole human, to bear witness to it, remained an inextricable part of her, clinging like a shadow that would never fully dissipate or leave her. She detailed her final thoughts, which were not grand or earth-shattering revelations about the universe, but quiet, introspective reflections on the enduring human condition, contemplating the remarkable capacity for memory that allowed one to hold on to the echoes of vanished power, the quiet burden of knowledge that set her apart, and the simple, persistent act of continuing existence in a world that had changed profoundly but quietly, illustrating the subtle, layered meaning about human life found uniquely within her singular experience. She began to explore the quiet, profound idea that the true essence of the story was perhaps not about the ancient gods themselves and their slow, silent withdrawal, but rather about the solitary human who is left behind to observe. The quiet aftermath, focusing on the quiet strength and gentle sorrow inherent in bearing witness to something so vast and sacred slipping away from the world, reflecting on how this deeply human experience of loss and remembrance was perhaps the true, lasting narrative that would echo long after the divine whispers were gone. She concluded her quiet contemplation by simply being present in the moment, watching the slow, quiet transformation of the sky from twilight to deep night, feeling the solid, comforting earth beneath her weary feet, the cool, gentle air on her skin, and the quiet, familiar hum of her unique burden residing peacefully within her, ending the story not with a dramatic flourish or a sudden climax, but with a gentle, contemplative stillness that left the listener with a sense of peaceful, melancholic reflection on the quiet, enduring persistence of the human spirit in a world forever changed by invisible departures.